All right, Chair Matthews, we are live streaming. You can see my screen and I will be ready to go whenever you are.
Okay, as soon as the clock hits 10.
All right, Chair Matthews, we are live streaming. You can see my screen and I'm
getting a little bit of an echo.
Is that better now?
Yes.
Okay.
Commissioner Tom, we'll get started right at 10. All right, good morning. At this time, we will begin our meeting of the California Racial Equity Commission. California Racial Equity Commission meeting is called to order at 10 a.m. in Sacramento, California. As we begin today's meeting, we do want to note a couple of items. First, based on expected attendance, we do not anticipate meeting quorum for this meeting. Jess will confirm attendance during roll call and a couple of agenda items from now. If quorum is not present, no action will be taken today. Second, the information and opinions expressed by presenters or public commenters before the commission reflect the views of the speaker. They do not necessarily represent the views of the commission or the Governor's Office of Land Use and Climate Innovation. Third, as a public advisory body, we allow public input at all meetings. However, we stand united with other Californians in condemning hate and recognizing the harm it causes. A hate act is a hostile expression or action committed in whole or in part because of a person's actual or perceived identity or identities, characteristics, including race, color, disability, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, or gender, including gender identity, or because that person is part of a protected group. The rich diversity among our population in California is one of our state's greatest assets, and we are committed to supporting and protecting all people in California. As a reminder, if you are a victim or witness to hate, racism, or bullying, you can report the incident and receive free support through the California VS Hate Resource Line by calling 833-8-NO-HATE or visiting cavshate.org. I will now turn it over to Dylan Turner-Keener to read our land and community acknowledgements. Dylan.
Thank you, Commissioner Matthews. We acknowledge with gratitude that the city of Sacramento is on the traditional and ancestral lands of the Nisenan, the Southern Maidu, the Valley and Plains Miwok, the Patwin Wintun peoples, and the people of Wilton Rancheria. May we acknowledge and honor the Native people who came before us and still walk beside us today on these ancestral lands by choosing to gather today in an active practice of acknowledgement and appreciation for Sacramento's Indigenous people's history, contribution, and lives. We are grateful for all Indigenous people who continue to care for and remain interconnected with this land. We promise to be conscientious stewards of this land for the future generations and are committed to ensuring inclusion of Indigenous people to inform the California Racial Equity Commission.
Thank you, Dylan. We will now move to the community acknowledgement as well that we read at the beginning of each commission meeting.
We thank and honor the Indigenous nations of this land who contribute to the building of this country. We recognize the forced and unpaid labor of California Indigenous peoples under Spanish, Mexican, and U.S. rule, especially within the mission system, where Native people were enslaved to build infrastructure, harvest food, and serve colonial institutions. Our ancestral lands, knowledge systems, and labor continue to shape the cultural and economic foundation of this state. Native nations in California contribute to the arts, governance, land management, cultural revitalization, and health sovereignty. We acknowledge and thank the people of African ancestry who are stolen from their homelands and brought to this country, whose free labor played a major role in the formation and economic wealth of this country. We also honor the contributions of Black ancestral scientists, inventors, and entrepreneurs whose contributions were stolen or never acknowledged. We honor and will not forget the thousands upon thousands of lives lost at the hands of enslavers, vigilantes, law enforcement, and other forces of suppression in this country. We affirm and uplift those of African ancestry living in this country today as a living testimony of the strength, love, faith, and fortitude of a resilient people. We acknowledge the international and global immigrant contributions who shaped this country's economy and helped build its infrastructure. We honor the contributions of Asian immigrant community, including Chinese railroad workers, the Japanese farmers, Filipino cannery workers and field workers, and other Asian workers as well. We acknowledge Latinos and Mexican immigrants have been integral to shaping economic growth in the U.S. from building homes, filling roles of agricultural needs, and other service industries have been influential to providing everyday needs to fellow Americans. These communities have filled critical workforce gaps and enriched American society with different intersectionalities of culture and beliefs. We recognize the impacts of U.S. militarism, colonial oppression, capitalistic tourism, appropriation of cultural heritage, and more have affected Pacifica and oceanic people and island relations. We acknowledge the harms of climate change and environmental pollutants from global powers that are harming islands and destroying oceans. Thank you for your community's contributions and roles of service in public health, the teachings of reciprocity, and how those lessons can be woven into societal structures serves as a model of hope and change for this country. Thank you. Back to you, Commissioner Matthews.
Thank you so much, Dylan, for sharing those powerful acknowledgments. I will now provide a brief overview of the agenda for this commission meeting. Our agenda for this meeting covers 13 agenda items. Those agenda items are, well, we've already covered a couple. Housekeeping, we're still doing some of that. And then we'll have public comment on matters not on the agenda. Item 3 will be the consent agenda. Then the chairman's report, share a brief report on our progress to date this year. Then we'll have a quick presentation on improving shared governance and analysis of public sector models to identify strategies for advancing equitable outcomes. Agenda item 6, principles for structural and systemic remediation. Then we'll have implementing and evaluating the racial equity framework, another presentation there. We'll have an update on an Office of Racial Equity, evaluation committee discussions, starting with Commissioner Tong. Then we will have Commissioner Tong also give a quick update on Implementation and Technical Assistance Committee. Commissioner Richardson is not expected today, so in lieu of Commissioner Richardson, we'll have Dylan share an update on the Data Committee. Then we'll have Commissioner Maldonado share an update on the Budget Equity Committee. And then finally, we will have a Community Engagement Committee update. Commissioner Salas is also not expected to be here today, and so Dylan will provide that update as collected as well. We do have hard copies of the agenda and other relevant meeting materials available at the physical meeting location at 1400 10th Street, Sacramento, California, on the second floor in room 203 if you are interested in picking those up. Materials are also available online on our website. All right, we will move forward to the next agenda item, which is remarks from distinguished guests. That includes any distinguished guests, elected officials, tribal leaders, or representatives, if anyone is present on the call. We will now welcome any opening remarks from distinguished guests who might be here. Do we have any distinguished guests with us today who'd like to make remarks?
No,
All right.
Chairperson Matthews, not today.
I can't see the list, so I appreciate you pinging me. Thank you so much. If anyone does show up later, we always do take a moment to pause and give them an opportunity to speak or to share. Thank you. All right. Fantastic. We will move forward to agenda item number 7, establishing quorum. So this is our roll call. Jess Godot, program analyst for the Racial Equity Commission, will take the roll call to establish quorum and provide an overview of the public comment process. Please note that the commission will not respond to public comments. Jess, I'll kick it over to you.
Thank you, Chair Matthews. I will now lead the roll call to establish quorum and provide an overview of the public comment process. Commissioner Amy Tong,
Here.
Commissioner Angelica Salas, Commissioner Gabriel Maldonado,
Present.
Commissioner Vice Chair Semboya Wright, Chairperson Traco Matthews,
Present.
Commissioner Yolanda Richardson. Please note Chair Matthews and Commissioners Maldonado and Tong are following the teleconference rules for advisory bodies outlined under Government Code Section 11123.5, which allows members to participate remotely. Under this code, remote commissioners are required to remain on screen throughout the meeting if in attendance. We have 3 out of 6 commissioners attending virtually today. We are not at quorum, therefore, no action will be taken during today's commission meeting. Back to you, Chair Matthews.
Thank you so much, Jess. I believe you are also up for the next agenda item, which is just instructions on public comment. So I'll kick it back over to you.
Please note that commissioners cannot respond to public comments. And I will now provide an overview of the public comment process. Thank you to everyone joining us today in person or online. I'm here to provide a guidance for the processes for this hybrid meeting, which we have designed with the intention of maximizing access by members of the public. For those joining the meeting online via Zoom or by phone, please note that your microphone is automatically muted when you join. To minimize the risk of background noise, you will not be able to unmute yourself. For those joining online via Zoom, please note that the webinar platform doesn't enable video for attendees, so we will not be able to see you. If you need technical assistance during the meeting or have a question about the meeting process, there are a few ways to contact us. If you are online via Zoom, the best way is by using the Q&A function, which several members of the Racial Equity Commission team are monitoring. If you joined by phone or you are watching via YouTube and you have access to email, you can email your question to racialequitycommission@lci.ca.gov. To make an in-person public comment, you can pick up a public comment card in the lobby of the Governor's Office of Land Use and Climate Innovation and return it to one of our commission employees. Please note you will need to submit a public comment card for each item you wish to speak on. You may now begin submitting public comment requests for all agenda items. If you plan to make public comment virtually, you must be signed on via Zoom, either through your internet browser, Zoom application, or dial in via phone. To submit an online public comment form, visit racialequity.lci.ca.gov/meetings and complete the public comment form linked there. A member will also drop it in the chat. When the public comment period for your items opens up, we will call on your name. When you hear your name, please raise your hand. To do this online in the Zoom webinar, click raise hand under the participants menu. To raise hand by phone, press *9. When it is your turn to speak, a member of our team will unmute your microphone. If you are online, you will see a window pop up alerting you that the host is unmuting you. You will need to click the option to approve unmute. After that, you can begin your comment. If you are on via your phone, you will hear a recorded message alerting you that your line is unmuted. You can begin your comment once your line is unmuted. Each speaker will have a maximum of 2 minutes to make their remarks. Speakers requiring or using interpretation services are allotted 4 minutes to facilitate full participation. If you're online, you'll see a timer pop up on your screen. Please monitor that and wrap up your remarks accordingly. Whether you are online or on via phone, Chair Matthews or employees will notify you when your time is up. After that, we will mute your microphone. You do not need to take any additional action. Thank you. Back to you, Chair Matthews.
Thank you so much, Jess, for explaining that process so eloquently. We are now going to open it up to public comment on agenda item number 1, which is just housekeeping. all of the things we've covered so far. Jess, is there any public comment?
There are 2 online public comments for this item. Each
Okay.
speaker, as a reminder, will have a maximum of 2 minutes to make their remarks. Speakers requiring or using translation services are allotted 4 minutes to facilitate full participation. If you're online, as a reminder, you will see a timer pop up on your screen. Please monitor that and wrap up your remarks accordingly. Whether you are online or on the phone, Chair Matthews or staff will notify you when your time is up. After that, we will mute your microphone. You do not need to take any additional action. So we will move straight to online public comment. Our first public commenter will be Vince Luce. Go ahead and raise your hand and staff will unmute you. And your 2 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
We
Yes,
can
we
hear
can.
you, Vince.
I think I meant to submit a public comment for items not on the agenda. So if that is a different spot, can I just give my comment there, please?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Next public commenter is Maria Barakat.
Good morning, commissioners and staff. My name is Maria Barakat. I also meant to do item number 2 as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. I will pass it back to you, Chair Matthews.
All right, no worries at all. Thank you for your patience with this structured process. We will now move on to our next agenda item, and it sounds like we do have public comment. This is public comment on matters not on the agenda. We will take this time for any public comments on items not on the agenda for today. The one thing I wanted to highlight or underscore is that public comment on items not on the agenda must be relevant to the commission's work. I know we have a couple of comments. I'll kick it over to you, Jess.
Thank you, Chair Matthews. We have 3 virtual public comments, so we will go ahead and start with Vince Luce. You want to kick us off, and the time, your 2-minute time will start when you begin.
Hi again. All right, good morning. My name is Vince Leus. I'm a program manager with Prevention Institute. We're also a member of the California Racial Equity Coalition. First, just want to welcome Commissioner Tong to the commission, and also thank the returning commissioners for your commitment to advancing racial equity in government. And I think I just wanted to focus my comments here on just acknowledging that there's a sort of transition process that the commission is in post completion of the racial equity framework. And I just wanted to highlight, the importance of having a fully resourced staffed and full commission body in this critical point of the work of the commission. In Prevention Institute's own policy advocacy work, we know that implementation of racial equity policy, procedure, and practice is a critical point in ensuring that racial equity policies and guidelines that we have worked so hard to pass are actually implemented in practice. And also in that implementation, we ensure that, the original racial equity intent and the heart of that work remains as we go into this sort of implementation phase. And so I think this is just more of letting y'all know that, Prevention Institute and the coalition are here to support in really thinking about how we appoint commissioners so that we have a full commission, and also ensure that we are able to hire a executive director in a timely fashion to really see the work through of this commission through 2030. So thank you so much.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you, Vince. We will now move on to the next virtual public comment from Maria Barakat. Time will begin once you start speaking.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Maria Barakat. I use they, she pronouns. I'm with the Greenlining Institute. I am the Senior Program Manager for Transformative Racial Equity. The Greenlining Institute works towards a future where communities of color can build wealth, live in healthy places filled with economic opportunity, and are ready to meet the challenges posed by climate change. First, I want to echo everything that Vince said, and also at the top, first, thank you all so much for your dedication to this commission and to communities of color in California, especially new commissioners and old, for the commitment that you take on during this challenging time and this critical moment for racial equity work in California. And for those who have been here from the beginning, who have seen this work through, I want to acknowledge how much dedication that has taken. And for the staff to be able to move this work forward, you are seen and appreciated. I want to just uplift what Vince said, the importance of this transition period, the momentum that was generated by the completion of the framework. We are excited to help continue move forward when the timing is right. We acknowledge that the transition period is also an important moment for investments in continuity for the commission's work. To be able to move towards implementation as soon as possible is critical for communities of color that continue to struggle under these unequitable conditions. The coalition, California Racial Equity Coalition, is here as a partner and continues to support you all going forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you, Maria, for your comment. We will move to the next public commenter, Eric Devinson. Please begin, and the timer will start.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairperson Matthews and members of the Commission. My name is Eric Anthony Devinson, and I'm a Doctor of Public Administration student and a local county commissioner and advisory committee chair from Riverside County. First, thank you for the intentional and deeply moving community acknowledgments shared today. As a academic working directly within the local county governance bodies, I wanted to express my appreciation for this commission's commitment to providing technical assistance to local government agencies. But as you continue your vital work, I urge the commission to keep a strong focus on how local county advisory bodies can better operationalize your upcoming statewide racial equity framework. Bridging the gap between state level frameworks and on the ground county policy implementation is where we can truly dismantle systemic barriers. So I look forward to partnering with and utilizing the Commission's resource to advance measurable, equitable outcomes in our region. Thank you so much for your time and leadership.
Thank you for your comment. Jess, do we have any other public comments?
That concludes our public comment for this item. Back to you, Chair Matthews.
Thank you. We will move forward with our next agenda item, which is the consent agenda. Consent agenda allows the commission to handle several routine items together with one vote instead of taking each item up separately. As we noted at the beginning of the meeting, we do not have a quorum, so we cannot vote on the consent agenda. But it does include approval of the October, December, and March commission meeting minutes, the bylaws, and committee appointments. Because we do not have quorum today, we cannot vote on these items during this meeting. They will need to come back for a vote at a future meeting when quorum is present. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge, I understand we have not had quorum the last, I believe, 2 meetings. And so we're starting to stack up on the meetings and do need to find a way to get quorum soon, and we will address that later in today's meeting. But are there any comments or clarifying questions from commissioners before we move to the next agenda item? Okay, hearing no questions or clarifying comments from commissioners, we will now take any public comment related to this agenda item. Jess,
There
any?
is, there is no public comment for this item. Pass it back to you.
Okay, thank you so much. We will now move on to our next agenda item, number 4, which is the chairman's report. I will share that briefly, and then I'll invite Adriana to share part of this chairman's report as well with a quick update. Good morning, commissioners and members of the public. I just want to begin by thanking everyone for joining today's meeting. I also want to thank the commission team for their continued work to support the commission, prepare today's materials, and help move the racial equity framework from development into implementation this year. Before moving into updates, I want to take a moment to again recognize Commissioner Pastor for his service on the California Racial Equity Commission. I know we shared some comments at the last meeting, but again, we haven't had quorum and he has not been able to attend in person. So just wanted to go on the record again, recognizing him for his service. Commissioner Pastor has brought deep expertise, thoughtful analysis, and a strong commitment to racial equity, public policy, and community-centered work. His contributions help shape the development of the framework and the Commission's understanding of how structural inequities show up across the state of California. On behalf of the Commission, I want to formally express our appreciation for his time, leadership, and service. At this time, we do not have updates on the appointment of a new executive director or new commissioners to replace folks like Commissioner Pastor and others. We understand the importance of these appointments to the Commission's ongoing work, as it was just articulated by some of our public comments. And we will continue working with the Governor's Office of Land Use and Climate Innovation as we receive additional information. In the meantime, the Commission team is continuing to support the Commission's core responsibilities, including community engagement, technical assistance, preparation for the annual report, and implementation planning for the racial equity framework. The Commission has now completed a major phase of the work with the development of the racial equity framework, as it was spoken to again via the public comment. The next phase is implementation. The framework was designed to be a practical guide for government entities working to advance racial equity. It includes tools, strategies, and guiding principles related to community engagement, data, budget equity, organizational infrastructure, technical assistance, and evaluation. As we move forward, the Commission's work will focus on helping government entities understand, apply, and continue building from the framework. As part of that implementation work, the Commission team has developed a proposed 3-day engagement and implementation model. This is where I will bring in Adriana Brooks, Program Manager, to give a high-level overview of the 3-day model. I'll kick it over to you, Adriana.
Thank you, Chair Matthews. I'm really excited to present this model today. I do want to give a quick shout out to our strategic capacity building analyst, Jess Gatto, for really, this is really her brainchild and it's just absolutely brilliant. So I'm happy to present it today on behalf of the whole team. So the purpose of this model is to strengthen how the Commission connects community voice, local context, and technical assistance. This model includes 3 connected parts. The first is about bringing community to us for a community meet and greet. This is where the Commission and the program team create space for community members, advocates, local leaders, and partners to share their experiences, priorities, and questions. On day 2, we have community immersion. So this is when the Commission and the program team go into community. This is when we go to community. Our goal for that is to better understand the local context. So that may include visiting places, programs, or community assets that were raised during the meet and greet. Finally, we take that information from day 1 and 2 to create structured opportunities for residents and trusted organizations to bring those lessons forward. So what we do then on day 3 is we bring those voices to local practitioners in the area. So this is where the Commission can help local agencies, community partners, and government practitioners think through how to apply the racial equity framework in practice. The model is intended to help us move from listening alone to listening, learning, and supporting action. Really take what we hear in days 1 and 2 to inform day 3. This model reflects the Commission's values of centering community and lived experiences of those most affected. It advances transparency and accountability. It uses data and storytelling together and supports implementation in a way that is practical and responsive. Additionally, this model supports accountability by helping the Commission return to communities with clearer connections between what we hear and how the work moves forward. Lastly, this model supports the development of our annual report by helping the Commission gather feedback, identify emerging themes, and document lessons learned all across California. We're really looking forward to providing updates on the progress of the implementation of this model. And yeah, just really excited that we are into this phase of the framework. Back to you, Chair Matthews. Oh, I see Commissioner Tong. Nope.
I think that might be my other account. I don't think that's me.
Okay. No problem. No problem.
Thank you so much, Adriana. I noticed your hand as well, Commissioner Tong. And so if you don't have a question, I will open it up to see if either commissioner that's here today has any clarifying questions or comments. Okay. All right. Well, thank you again, Adriana. That looks great. I also want to note that the Commission has several items that will require formal action by the full Commission. We will need a quorum. Because we have existing action items that require a quorum, we have been working with the program team to identify a date for a special meeting. Purpose of that meeting will be to consider and vote on pending Commission business, which may include bylaws, meeting minutes, committee assignments, and other items that require Commission approval, all of the things that I spoke to just a few minutes ago. The team will coordinate with commissioners on availability and will ensure the meeting is properly noticed and posted. Committee work will continue to be an important part of how the Commission advances its responsibilities. Today's agenda includes committee report outs that will help the full Commission and the public understand progress across the Commission's priority areas. As it was mentioned in the public comments, we know this as well. The Commission is in a transition moment. We are moving from developing the framework and helping to put it into practice. That work will require continued coordination, clear roles, strong public process, and a commitment to remaining grounded in community. And for now, doing all of that without an executive director. So we appreciate your patience and all hearts continuing to support this work while we are in this transition period. I appreciate the commissioners, specifically the Commission team, our partners, and members of the public for continuing to support this work as you have over the last few months. Thank you so much. I'll just open it up for any additional comments or questions from the other commissioners that are here today. All right, see a thumbs up. We are now going to open it up to public comment on agenda item number 4, the chairman's report. Jess, any public comments?
There are no public comments for this item. I pass it back to you.
All right, we are moving right along. We move forward to agenda item number 5, which will be a presentation, Proving Shared Governance and Analysis of Public Sector Models to Identify Strategies for Advancing Equitable Outcomes. I believe we have some presenters and speakers from UCLA Public Policy. It's a student presentation. So I will kick it over to Dylan Turner-Keener.
Thank you, Chair Matthews. I have the pleasure of overlooking some fabulous student graduates from UCLA who will be presenting their research and their findings. So I'm going to pass it over to Julio and Rodas.
Great. Thank you so much, Dylan. Good morning, commissioners. My name is Rodas Hailu.
My name is Julio Casillas Alfaro.
And we are both recent graduates of UCLA's Public Policy Master's program. We are excited to be here today to share a high-level summary of our capstone project, which we've conducted in consultation with the Commission, which is entitled Improving Shared Governance. In terms of our agenda, we will be presenting on the following items. I will discuss the project overview, a highlight of our methodology, and some problem identification as a result of our data collection. And then I'll pass it over to Julio to discuss policy options, criteria, evaluation, and policy recommendations. Next slide, please. So just as a project overview, we have collaborated with the California Racial Equity Commission since fall of last year on our capstone project. And this project, as our title suggests, is examining the concept of shared governance. The topic really emerged from the Commission's racial equity framework. Our capstone is really an attempt to enhance the discussion of shared governance within the framework by really talking about how shared governance can be operationalized successfully and what outcomes are produced by implementing shared governance. Additionally, as it relates to our findings and policy recommendations that we'll share in our subsequent slides, what we're sharing today to the Commission is really guidance that the Commission can share in terms of its technical assistance to its state agency partners. So to that end, our policy question really driving our project is the following. How can state agencies enhance or improve their implementation of shared governance to help advance equitable policy outcomes? Next slide, please. So in terms of our methodology, we had 3 components, which included a document analysis, literature review, and stakeholder interviews. For our document analysis, we looked at several state agencies that we identified as having implemented shared governance within their decision-making frameworks. So we looked at publicly available documents to synthesize any trends amongst this implementation of shared governance within these agencies. So these documents included things such as charters, bylaws, meeting minutes, reports, and strategic plans. The next component of our methodology included a literature review. So these included peer-reviewed articles, case studies, and conceptual frameworks. And lastly, we conducted around 11 interviews with a diverse set of stakeholders who are either practitioners or experts on shared governance. These individuals came from sectors such as government, nonprofit, and academic settings. Next slide, please. Going back to our document analysis, we just wanted to provide some more context about the agencies that we examined as part of our document analysis. So we looked at 2 California state agencies, the publicly available documents for these state agencies. Additionally, we looked at a shared governance model outside of California, within the state of Washington through its Department of Social and Health Services Poverty Reduction Work Group. We looked at this model because it's considered to be a nationally recognized framework of shared governance because there are actually trackable and equitable outcomes tied to the work group's implementation of shared governance. Next slide, please. So in terms of the problem identification, we were able to uplift 4 common challenges or tension points that can emerge when implementing shared governance. So these 4 items are essentially the themes that we were able to synthesize from our 3-phase methodology. So I'll share some highlights on each component in the subsequent slides. Next slide, please. So the first tension point we were able to highlight was around decision-making mandates. And what we mean here is that in the examples we looked at for shared governance, oftentimes these bodies struggled with the ability to enforce their recommendations. Essentially, there's a tension that these governance bodies often are soliciting stakeholder input, but lack a mechanism to ensure that this input translates into actionable and equitable outcomes through strategy implementation. Oftentimes, this is a result of governance bodies being limited in terms of their decision-making and enforcement authority. And another component to this is that there is a tension with the perceived role of what these governance bodies are meant to do versus what the legal and statutory role is in terms of how these governance bodies are legally structured. Next slide, please. The second tension point we were able to uplift is around operational difficulties with shared governance bodies. So what we mean here are 2 points. One is that governance participants often have to juggle multiple meetings and expected deliverables as part of their mandate in terms of participating in these governance bodies. And this can be somewhat tricky for participants who have a lot of expectations outside of volunteering their time. Additionally, operational difficulties include resource constraints with agency staff providing support to shared governance groups. Next slide, please. The third tension point is around governance siloing. So oftentimes, some of the shared governance groups were siloed within a specific agency, and this is a concern that we identified because this can either create duplicated efforts or poor relationship building amongst the groups. Next slide, please. And lastly, the fourth tension point is around stakeholder composition. What we mean here is there are 3 points that we really mean around stakeholder composition. One is that oftentimes there can be attendance or quorum challenges with the shared governance groups because people are volunteering their time and have other obligations outside of these groups that can really limit or constrain their ability to be full participants in shared governance bodies. Additionally, there are barriers for full participation and engagement. These can be things such as lack of stipends and the fact that meetings are held during workdays. And lastly, there are challenges with recruitment and retention, specifically with the concept of balancing people with lived experience who can speak to the policy, the ramifications of poor policy implementation, while also balancing the subject matter experts who can really ensure that the recommendations within the shared governance body are politically feasible for implementation. And I'll hand it over to Julio to discuss the remaining portions of our slides.
Alrighty, thank you, Rhodas. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Julio Casillas Alfaro. And so to build on what Rhodas mentioned, essentially the 4 problem areas that we just walked through, we developed 4 policy options. Now, each option directly responds to a barrier we identified in our analysis. And each is designed essentially to be actionable for state agencies for pursuing shared governance. So option 1, process and outcome evaluation. So this option asks agencies to track the full life cycle of stakeholder recommendations. So from the moment input is offered to whether it actually shapes a decision, and to require regular evaluation reports. So this directly addresses the decision-making mandate problem where input is solicited, but there's no mechanism ensuring it translates into action. Second being specificity in statute language. So here, agencies would define power sharing levels and response timelines directly in statute. Rather than leaving a governance body's authority ambiguous, the law would clarify what the body can expect and when. This targets the gap between the perceived role of a governance body and its actual legal authority. Third being developing participation incentives. So this option tackles our stakeholder composition problem head on, offering stipends, reimbursements, flexible meeting times. So participation isn't limited to those who can afford to volunteer, others being transportation, childcare, etc. It's about lowering the barriers that keep lived experience and community voices out of the room. Last being internal audit for effectiveness. So the final option calls for a structured internal audit examining operations, life cycle, equity, and coordination across governance bodies. It's the most comprehensive option, and as you'll see, it addresses several problems at once. Next slide, please. So to compare these options fairly, we scored each against 4 weighted criteria. Political feasibility weighted at 40%. So this is the single most heavily weighted criterion. It captures the interest and will from legislative or agency leadership. We weighted it highest because even the strongest option fails if there's no political appetite to adopt it. So the remaining 3 criteria are weighted at 20% each. Second, the first one being economic feasibility, which is the fiscal impact on an agency's operating budget. The second being operational capacity, which is the administrative burden of actually implementing the option. And social equity being the third and final option, which is the option's capacity to improve access to services and resources, which connects directly to the commission's core mission. Next slide, please. So this chart below shows the weighted scores under our base criteria model. Each colored segment is one of the criterion's contribution, and the bold number on the right is the total. So starting from the top, you'll see option 1, process and outcome evaluation scored at an overall 2. It performs strongly on political feasibility, which is the 0.8 segment you'll see in the dark green, because evaluation and transparency tend to attract broad support. Options 2 and 3 with specificity in statute language and developing incentives, each scored at 1.6. So both scored evenly across the criteria but landed lower on political feasibility. Changing statute language and committing new funding for stipends are heavier lifts politically, which pulled their totals down. And option 4, internal audit for effectiveness and efficiency, scored the highest at a 2.2. What sets it apart is that it scored higher on social equity at a 0.6, which you'll see the teal color, rather than a 0.4, while holding strong political feasibility at 0.8. In other words, it advances equity meaningfully without sacrificing feasibility. So under our base model, option 4 comes out on top, with option 1 close behind. But a good analysis shouldn't rest on a single set of weights, so we tested how sensitive these results are. Next slide, please. So this slide shows our sensitivity analysis. We reran the score under 3 different weighing scenarios to make sure our recommendation holds up. So we used a sensitivity analysis or criteria alternative matrix. So the first one was our base model that we just went through in the prior slide. The second is increasing the political feasibility weight all the way up to 55%. And everything else at 15%. So testing what happens when political will dominates the decision. And the third being CAM3, which is uses equal weights across all 4 criteria. So all of them treating cost, capacity, equity, and feasibility as equally important. So the key takeaway is that option 4 remains the highest scoring option across all 3 scenarios with a 2.2, 2.25, and 2.15 respectively. So it's the most robust choice regardless of how we weight the criteria. Option 1, you'll see, is consistent at a 2 across all 3, holding steady as the strong runner-up. Options 2 and 3 are the most sensitive to the weighting. So they range from 1.45 to 1.75 depending on the scenario, which tells us their value depends heavily on the assumptions you bring. The headline, our recommendation isn't an artifact of one particular weighting. Option 4 wins under every scenario we tested. Next slide, please. So with that, this brings our recommendation to option 4, essentially an internal audit for effectiveness. We recommend it because it's the highest scoring, but also the most robust option, and because a single audit framework can address multiple problems we identified at once. Having 5 components, the first being attention and retention analysis. This directly responds to the quorum and retention challenges we found by systematically tracking who's participating and who's dropping off. Secondary being resource allocation review, examining whether agency staff and resources are adequate to support these governance bodies, which speaks to the operational difficulties. Third, equity composition audit. So assessing whether the body actually reflects the community it serves, tied to our stakeholder composition problem and the commission's equity mission. Fourth, recommendations lifecycle tracking. This follows stakeholder input through to decision, which addresses the decision-making mandate. Lastly, cross-community coordination. So this is reviewing how communities and subcommittees interact, targeting the governance siloing we observed. So essentially, the strength of this recommendation is its integration. Rather than a narrow fix, an internal audit gives agencies a repeatable, evidence-based tool to diagnose and improve shared governance across every dimension we studied. And it does so without requiring statutory change or major new appropriations upfront, which is why it scores so well on feasibility. Next slide. So that concludes our analysis. To recap, we examined shared governance across 2 California state agencies and Washington State's Department of Social and Health Services Poverty Reduction Workgroup. We identified 4 recurring barriers, and after testing 4 policy options against weighted criteria and a sensitivity analysis, we recommend an internal audit as the most robust, feasible, and equity advancing path forward. Thank you for the opportunity to partner with the Commission on this project, and we welcome your questions and reflections.
All right, thank you so much for that terrific presentation as well. Dylan, I didn't know if you had any follow-up thoughts or comments to share, but if not, I'll open it up to the commissioners in case they have any feedback, questions, or insights.
No questions from me.
All right, commissioners.
Yeah, well, it's Gabe. Thank you, Chair Matthews. I just wanted to say, first of all, this is an amazing tool. And I think particularly as it relates to Budget Equity Committee, there's some key priorities that we have, and it really relates to creating templates that would hopefully be in partnership with DOF. And I was sort of making a mental note and taking some notes on the side on very specific areas that you all have outlined that sort of save me and the commission and the staff a lot of work in sort of putting some teeth and sort of outlining some of our implementation toolkits. So I just wanted to say thank you for that. The question I had, and this is something that you may not have done analysis on, but I would love if you have any, conjectured thoughts at the top of your head, is through lines between what you have done and our framework. Like I think now what we're looking at is the, providing implementation expertise and moving forward. And I don't know if there's anything as it relates to this model here that you all think is like top areas as it relates to our framework that could be applicable. And if you don't have any thoughts on that, please don't feel pressured. But certainly you've done deep dives and you may have looked at our framework already. So I don't know if there's any points of connection that you might want to highlight for me that I may not be seeing.
Thank you so much for your question, Commissioner. I would say, as it relates to the framework and our presentation on shared governance, one thing I would think about is setting expectations for how shared governance is supposed to look like. I think setting expectations at the front end with any body that you advise as a commission, it's important so that all participants understand what the constraints are in terms of what the shared governance body is able to produce. But those are just my initial thoughts. I don't know, Julio, if you have anything else to add.
Yeah. Picking back on setting expectations and, kind of tying in, budgetary and financial language, making sure it's legible, making sure that the community actually is able to understand the numbers that the agency, commission, or thereof is trying to output. It's having to storytell, but storytell in a way where the community can actually understand and comprehend what is being relayed and how the community can step in, or the power and voices that they have to move the progress forward. Role clarity could be another one as well. Nitty-gritty as well. But those are my top recommendations at this point: is legibility and role clarity.
No, I want to say thank you for that because, I think in one aspect, we're looking at how this tool applies to the public and the community, and then that's a lot of your reference points. But what I was even and that I was seeing is that these are practical tools as it relates to DOF potentially communicating with rest of state agencies. I mean, we act like people at state agencies aren't also the public and they don't also appreciate clarity of expectations, role setting, a storytelling that they can understand. So I'm also seeing application as it relates to templates that we may advise DOF to create, how they then can be relatable and implementable with the agencies that they're correlating. So I just want to say thank you. I see some aspects as it relates to implementation for the public side, but also as it relates to our technical assistance between state agencies.
Yeah, of course. And one last thing I wanted to add is creating crosswalks because, the financial world can be very different from the IT world or, thereof. And so creating that crosswalk of, well, what does this mean? What does that mean? Because we can all kind of say the same thing, but in our own way.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Absolutely. Commissioner Tong?
Yeah, just quickly to kind of pile on to the observation that the commissioner have already shared, and great jobs to our presenters for presenting this very I call it very thoughtful report, and I especially like the part that you've highlighted the intentionality need to be done to make sure that the community's lived experience voice can be heard by making this convenient for them to participate, as well as the straightforward, simple language that can be used when it coming to provide instruction, so that everybody has a level of understanding and therefore help to achieve, the expectation that's laid out. I do want to just echo that for someone that are typically on the implementation side. Those are greatly appreciated. So thank you for your work.
Thank you, Commissioner Tong. I just want to double down on what Commissioner Maldonado said or asked in the response. I think that was terrific. And it reminds me of several conversations we've had over the course of this journey about the simplicity of language and the need for exceptional clarity for all parties involved at every level, including, state employees, folks who are actually implementing the change, trying to be as clear as possible. So love that concept related to crosswalks and providing that level of clarity for them as well. Any other comments that either of you would like to share? Final thoughts, words of advice?
I don't know if Rhoda's had anything. I would say the only word of advice is, the research isn't easy, but the main thing is just keep trucking on and keep, following that main goal of trying to, again, tease away or get more into what you're actually trying to identify and what these different communities are actually experiencing when identifying these problems. Especially right now, I would say had a lot more barriers than expected. But I would say that makes the work much more important than ever.
Thank you. Rhodas? Okay.
I just want to say thank you so much to the commission, the commissioners and the staff for supporting us as we've conducted this research project for the past few months. So just thank you for all your time and resources and support.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both again for a terrific presentation and for answering our questions. We'll let you go. The public have some questions as well. And I did see a note in the chat from Adriana. So if you do have questions, there is a Q&A functionality and you can drop those in there and we'll try to respond as well. But now we are going to open it up for public comment. Jess, do we have any public comments on this agenda item?
Thank you, Chair Matthews. We do have, it looks like, 3 public comments for this item. Just to remind speakers, you have a maximum of 2 minutes to make your remarks. Speakers requiring or using translation services are allotted 4 minutes to facilitate full participation. We will go ahead and start with our online commenters, and we will begin with Maria Bearcat. And time will start when you do, Maria.
Thank you, Maria Barakat. Again, with the Green Lighting Institute, I wanted to say first, congratulations to you both on your capstone and your graduation. I also did my capstone on the Racial Equity Commission work in 2023. And this is wonderful research and it's so helpful. Thank you so much for your time on this and interest. First, the findings are really supportive of the work that the commission is tasked with doing, building out community engagement and shared governance models, and much of what you have discovered really aligns with materials that the California Racial Equity Coalition developed in 2024 and 2025 for the commission as well. I'm referencing our community engagement brief. And so we're on the right track. I wanted to add a couple of notes on our end. Community really ought to be involved in creating the process as well, like creating the shared governance model. What we're seeing at smaller scale, just as a note, is that is a strong way to build community buy-in, is by having community included from the start of the modeling. Second, just wanted to note the importance and I think the requirement of resources and investments in the education and skills building aspect of getting community ready to be able to engage in these types of policy projects. And then transparency. How does this process embed transparency all through it as well as in its results? So how are we thinking about amplifying the results of these shared governance models to the public and to communities directly? Thank you so much for your work on this.
Thank you for your comment.
Okay, we can move to the next public comment. Eric Anthony Devinson, you are next. Time will start when you do.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you both for that presentation and congratulations. Yeah, I wanted to echo that as far as your capstone. This is great work, you guys. I had two questions, but I'll just ask this question for now. Regarding the barriers and meetings held during work days, that seems to stick out to me as one of the structural barriers to participation. So how will the attendance and retention analysis of your option internal audit evaluate these factors or administrative scheduling, in order to incentivize state agencies to move beyond, I don't know, restrictive workday structures for retention purposes? And that's pretty much the question.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you. I see Eric Anthony Devinson, you requested another public comment. Would you like to start that one?
Okay, so then, sorry, I am sort of, well, I shouldn't say sort of confused. I am a little bit confused because I thought these were Q&As as opposed to just public comment. So then I don't want to take too much of the commission's time. So no, this is fine. If this is just a comment and it's sort of kind of related to the first comment, so I'm okay.
Eric, give me 1 second. Let me just ask, because we do have Doug here. Doug, is it okay for the panelists to answer questions via public comment?
The public comment is not pertaining to an item on the agenda. I would say it's more appropriate to answer these questions in a subsequent meeting.
Okay, got it. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you. I was going to reiterate the same thing. So this is an opportunity to make a public comment. We will not respond to public comments. The only response that I'll give is thank you so much for your comment. And also, we would not expect panelists who have presented to respond to public comments as well, except at a later date. But thank you so much for giving us the food for thought. We do appreciate all of the feedback, all of the insights, all of the good questions. I'm sure our panelists will also take those back with them. And yeah, that's okay. No worries at all. You're welcome to continue to drop those in the Q&A section. And if it is something that can be addressed quickly, right away, almost more logistical, we'll try to respond to those right away. Thank you so much. All right, any other comments?
That concludes public comment for this item. Thank you, Chair Matthews.
Thank you so much, Jess. We will now move forward to our next agenda item. And thank you again so much, Rodas and Julio. Appreciate you. Our next agenda item, number 6, is Principle for Structural and Systemic Remediation. It's a presentation from the Othering and Belonging Institute. And so we'll hear from Stephen Menendian. Hopefully I pronounced that appropriately, Assistant Director of the Othering and Belonging Institute at UC Berkeley, who will present the brief on principles for structural and systemic remediation. Stephen, I will now pass it to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Again, it's an honor to be here with you again. It's been about a year from my last presentation, and it really is an honor. This is such important work, and it's not, I think, exaggeration to say that what I'm about to present is the culmination of my more than 20 years of professional life, which is understanding the nature, extent, dynamics of racial inequality, but most importantly, what do we do about it? How do we solve it? And some of the things I'm going to present may be a little bit heterodox from what is generally thought. And also, just as a footnote, I have been working now for over a year on a journal article on the history of racial commissions in the United States, going back to the Freedmen's Inquiry Commission, the Ferguson Commission, the Kerner Commission, probably one of the most important. And so it's yet another reason it's an honor to be working with you at California, roll up our sleeves and see what we can do here. So let me now open up my, and the lessons from that are something I would love to share with commissioners at another point. But today I've been asked as part of this module to talk about how do we actually solve racial inequality, not just writ large, but from a perspective of structural and systemic change. And so that's the focus. Today I have 5 principles for doing that I'm going to present, but I have to do a little bit of laying the groundwork and defining what I mean. I apologize, I'm going to talk fast because there's a lot of content. So I'm actually doing the opposite of what the previous speakers had advised in terms of clarity, simple language. This is going to be a bit more academic. So I'm just forewarning that, but appreciate, again, your attention and interest in this. Let me move to the slide share and make sure this works. Oops. Okay. So it's principles for structural and systemic remediation with the focus on state government, but also county and local government, I think, follow through on this. This is a YouTube video that I created 3 or 4 years ago, which I will make available to the public. It's about 8 minutes defining structural racism and how it differs. And so let me just briefly go through some of the types or causes of racial inequality. Most people still, despite a lot of education, public education efforts in the last 5 to 6 years, think of racism in interpersonal terms, which is the idea that there's sort of a racial victim, maybe a victim of discrimination, and there's a bigoted or prejudiced actor that acts upon that victim that denies an opportunity. And that's what we call the interpersonal racism model. Then there's, of course, institutional racism, which was a term coined in the 1960s by Stokely Carmichael and Charles Hamilton that recognized that racism can be more deeply embedded, and that the contemporary understanding of this is that you can have neutral rules that seem to affect everyone, but actually have disparate outcomes or racial disparities. And the critical part, both in the original conception of it and in the contemporary conception, is that it does not require intent. And not only does it not require intent, there may not even be an intentionality or motive behind it. So, in the classic case, original case law, that this was probably intentional, was the Supreme Court case of Griggs in the early 1970s of Duke Power Company, in which immediately after the adoption of the Civil Rights Act, the Duke Power Company eliminated racially discriminatory hiring and promotion practices and replaced them with facially neutral educational requirements that had the same effect. And that the Supreme Court then affirmed the concept of disparate impact, which is now embedded across federal law, although The current administration is doing its best to rescind that. In fact, there was a rule rescission proposed disparate impact rule just last week. So that's being litigated, so to speak, at the federal level as we speak. Moving on, systemic racism is a step beyond institutional racism, which is a recognition that we live in systems and system elements interact so that inequalities in one realm, one domain can carry over into another. So you think about something like the educational system. In the educational system, you have different elements. You have elementary schools, primary schools, secondary schools, community colleges, higher education, so on. So if there's inequality, it's say the pre-K level, that can carry over into the primary level, which can carry over to the secondary level, which creates inequities in admissions and higher education and a lot of fights over admissions. Another example might be the criminal justice system, right? So you have policing as part of it, you have courts, you have prisons and jails as part of it. So inequity, you have probation systems and so on. Inequity in one part of the system can manifest and carry over time or laterally into other parts of the system. So system is really defined here as multiple elements interacting, like the solar system, right? Gravitational forces and so on interacting together. Structural racism is actually sometimes conflated with systemic racism, but I've consistently tried to make the case that they are different. They're different because structural racism is actually a larger view. So systemic racism looks at a particular system, criminal justice system, healthcare system, educational system, housing and transportation, whatever. Structural actually is a system of system views and also non-system elements. So it incorporates markets and incorporates interpersonal racism and so on. So that's sort of just getting clear on types and causes. So here's an example. Individual racism, an individual problem would be losing a credit card. An interpersonal problem would be having a credit card stolen. An institutional problem would be charged higher interest rates on credit card because of your zip code by financial institutions. Systemic problem would be financial industry rules that affect people differently based on their personal histories, their familial histories, their familial wealth, inheritance advantages or disadvantages, and also just the regulatory and sort of trajectory of financial instruments and financial institutions. Structural assessment would be credit risk assessment is tied to credit history, which is highly correlated with accumulated intergenerational family wealth, et cetera. So you can see how this problem looks different depending on the lens you have and how you define the nature of the problem. You know, the basic idea here, just to really simplify it, is the solution you implement depends upon how you understand the problem, right? So if you understand the problem as interpersonal, then your solutions have to be aimed at interpersonal. If you understand the problem as systemic, then your solutions have to be systemic in nature. If you understand it as structural, then you need a completely different set of solutions. And so there's often a mismatch in racial equity efforts between sort of a conception of something. So you might have a claim that we understand something to be systemic, but then you look at the recommendation, it's really an interpersonal recommendation or even an institutional recommendation. So tailoring the remedy to the problem is really a critical issue here. So again, moving forward, not all racial inequality is caused by structural dynamics, so I don't want to overstate that, but much more is caused by structural inequality that's generally appreciated. So how do I define structural racial inequality? Structural racial inequality, in my definition, are the forces and arrangements that foster human development, nurture potential, extend opportunity, and facilitate well-being, and that those forces are racialized, meaning that they generate and reinforce group advantages and disadvantages. So the forces basically that, in the language of social science, that imbue human capital, develop human capital, are unevenly distributed in the United States based on neighborhoods, based upon municipal jurisdictions, based upon county jurisdictions, regions, and on upward. So that's really the key. And so these things are unevenly distributed. So think about the healthiest neighborhoods, the best performing schools, the strongest peer and natural environments, the dynamics of markets and anchor institutions. All of these are unevenly distributed by race in the United States. And so just as a simple example, children of color, particularly Black and Latino children, are far more likely to attend high poverty schools or live in high poverty neighborhoods than white students. And not just high poverty, but extremely high poverty. So schools that maybe are 60, 70, 80% children, populated with children who qualify for free and reduced lunch. Whereas it's very rare with the exception of some parts of Appalachia, to ever see a predominantly white school that has more than 10% children qualify for free and reduced lunch. So the focus of structural racism is that structural forces, rather than acts of individual discrimination, racist ideas and beliefs about group inferiority or presumed cultural difference, explain much, again, but not all, of the stark and persistent racial disparities that are observed across American life. We've actually created a dashboard at OBI called the Racial Disparities Dashboard that has about almost 90 disparities observable across different realms of American life. It's, to my knowledge, the most comprehensive single repository where you can look that up if you're curious. But simply put, unequal opportunity produces unequal outcomes. But I have to say as a nuance, because you'll hear people say that not all outcomes are caused by unequal opportunity. That's true, but that doesn't negate the fact that much unequal outcomes are caused by unequal opportunity. So one of the things that I just want to caution against, though, is, again, the flattening of systemic and structural into interpersonal. So when I give a presentation like this, it's not uncommon for someone to say, but isn't it true that a lot of these structural forces were put in place by a racist actor or a bigot? And I have to confess, yes, in some cases that is true. But much of racial inequality that's structured today is not actually driven by that. In fact, so the metaphor I use, it's a web without a spider. Some people will say, well, aren't all webs created by spiders? Answer, no. There are a lot of webs that aren't. And in a lot of cases, the spider has been not just long dead, but long gone. And so the focus, what happens is a lot of our energy goes into finding the spider. So we'll allocate 60 to 70% of our energy. Let's look for the spider instead of the 60 to 70% that should be spent on dismantling the web. So this is one of the heterodox points that I make. We really have to focus on dismantling the web, not finding the spider, especially if the spider has been dead for 75 years. So this is what I'm saying is that much, again, not all, of the structural dynamics are not explained by racial prejudice, animus, resentment, aversion, or even anxiety and discomfort. In many cases, they're a product of self-interest, opportunism, and this is what I tend to really focus on: indifference and neglect and inadequate foresight. Indifference and neglect are really important to understand. Local government can understand that their actions will have an impact on racial inequality, but they might just not do anything about it. It's not that they say they don't care, but they just move forward anyway. And so neglect and indifference are actually really important. The Kerner Commission report, when they're interviewing mostly Black youth in the cities where these uprisings occurred, the main thing they heard was the feeling of neglect, that white society, predominantly white institutions, and political leaders just didn't care. They just didn't care. So it's the lack of care that actually really needs to be attended to, and inadequate foresight. So here's something that I would just sort of, as a thought experiment to kind of prove this point. If we had a monkey's paw, or could snap our fingers and curb out all acts of racial discrimination, the reality is that racial disparities on most significant measures would persist on a massive scale. And that shows you that discrimination, although there are literally millions of instances of discrimination a year, it is not the principal driver of racial inequality in America. It is how the path trajectory of past decisions combined with contemporary policies. And I like to emphasize contemporary policies because it is contemporary policies that actually magnify racial inequality. If it wasn't, we wouldn't actually see many of these disparities getting larger. Instead, they would be flattening or shrinking over time. Instead, many of them, childhood poverty disparities, incarceration, a lot of these disparities are actually the wealth gap has grown by, especially since 2009, it's getting larger and larger and larger. These things are getting worse, not better. And so it's not just because of path dependency is my point. It's also current policies that are, again, seemingly neutral, but have these disparate impacts that maintain and undergird these structural dynamics. So what is the source? It is a complex system. It's the interaction of many policies, people, and institutions over many years, most of which, again, not all, are either well-intended or not colored by racial animus or based on racial ideas. And they nonetheless result in significant and large racial disparities. And that structural logic does not require a racist or bigoted actor. It only requires indifference and an allowance those policies continue. As long as we let those policies continue, these racial inequality will persist. And so, as I said, it's like a spider. It's I should say, it's the web without the spider. I've got this inverted on the thing. It's the web without the spider. And the task is to dismantle the web, not to locate and judge the spider. And so the metaphor I like to use, I think is helpful, is it's like the federal tax code. Someone will say, well, who's the mind behind the federal tax code? Good luck identifying a congressperson who is behind that, right? Because the tax code is created literally over generations. It's the accretion of countless bills that are interacting over time. It's a sprawling Byzantine complex of practices, rules, institutions, interactions that were, at least in some cases, designed for the common good, not always, but in the ultimate sense have become exploited or manipulated by the well-heeled, special interest, and well-connected. So the more expert you are on the tax code, the more that you're able to find those loopholes, manipulate it. Structural racism is very much like that. Those with advantage can take advantage of current systems, and they do. But the thing is, so this is structural. I draw a distinction between structural inequality and structural racism. What I just described is structural inequality. Structural racism, then, in my opinion, is the neglect and callous indifference to that dynamic, to that system. And I use a quote from Elie Wiesel here, which I think is very important. He says, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. The opposite of art is not ugliness, it's indifference. The opposite of faith is not heresy, it's indifference. And the opposite of life is not death, it's indifference. The point here is, as long as we allow these systems to perpetuate racial inequality, we're to blame, especially if we have the knowledge and understanding of what they're causing. It's our indifference, not necessarily our animus or our prejudice, that allows this to continue. So moving forward, getting to my principles in just a moment, systems theory derives from a body of academic knowledge called complex systems theory or complex systems dynamics. And it comes out of fields such as cybernetics, ecology, and mathematics that try and identify what are the principles of systems, what are the characteristics of systems, and how do we intervene in those systems. So I've already given you some definitions of systems, how they interact. These are some images that come from the application of systems theory to racial inequality. This is by a sociologist, Barbara Reskin, who actually sent me a note before she published this, because she found a primer I had published in 2006 that she used in her journal article here for the American Sociological Association. But again, sort of showing how there are arrows across these different systems that interact. This is a chart that I have created, modified from the urban social scientist George Galster at Wayne State, that shows some of the critical layers in what we call the opportunity structure, which is the racialized structure that produces racialized outcomes. And the critical elements here are local, so local jurisdictional characteristics, the municipality you live in, the neighborhood you live in, the metropolitan region that you're situated within, and how those interact with fixed personal and parental characteristics, your family wealth, your family race, the marital status, and so on, with your malleable personal characteristics to produce achieved outcomes. Again, this model is pretty sophisticated. I can talk more about it later if you'd like. Research by the economist Raj Chetty gives us a basic estimate of what percentage each of these layers matter in terms of outcomes. His research decomposed finds that about 28% of achieved outcomes in terms of economic outcomes are attributable to the local jurisdiction, so the school district, the municipality you live in, 27% to neighborhood characteristics, peers, local environment, parks and rec opportunities, et cetera, and about 1/3 to metropolitan. So you can see how important a metro region is when you think about the Bay Area, say, compared to Detroit, right? Just the economic, the industry, the economic growth, the corporations and investments that are made, and so on. Here's another, an older, I don't have time to go through all of this, but here's an older model that comes from Galster and Killian, 1995. It's called the urban opportunity structure, where he tries to decompose the elements that constitute that system. It's just, again, another model I'm presenting for your insight. But the key important concept from systems theory is the concept of feedback loops. And we've heard this in a kind of an ordinary vernacular, but feedback loops actually have more specific academic definitions. I'm going to give you two. One is a negative feedback loop. So a negative feedback loop is something that resists an intervention within a system. So an example of a negative feedback loop would be in response to desegregation mandates, when federal courts in mostly the 1970s and 80s, a little bit in the late 60s and somewhat in the early 90s, were ordering major metropolitan systems to desegregate, first in the South and then later on in the North. probably most infamously in Boston in the late 70s, but across the North. One of the responses that white families would do was to leave the district. So Boston went from having something like, I think, a 60 to 70% white student population in the early 1970s to like a 20% white student population a decade later, because white families would move their kids into private schools. This also happened in the South, but more aggressively in the South, where instead of allowing desegregation to happen, oftentimes Southern districts would close schools and they would open private academies or parochial schools, or white families wouldn't even send their kids to school at all to avoid desegregation. That's an example of a negative feedback loop. A positive feedback loop is a transformative, it's catalytic, it's a snowball. It's where you have an intervention and it builds on itself and produces a virtuous cycle. So it's important to understand what kind of interventions are going to trigger negative feedback loops, which are going to trigger positive, and how to put yourself on a positive feedback loop or anticipate the negative feedback response and plan for that. So principle one, the 5 principles here for, again, addressing and advancing racial equity and addressing racial inequality. The first is to seek leverage points. So a leverage point is a point in a complex system where a relatively small but well-focused intervention can produce lasting, significant, and often persistent improvements. So you don't have to, have, for example, a reparations policy to solve reparations policy is probably the only thing that will put a significant dent in the racial wealth gap, but it's not the only thing that you can do to actually begin to change and narrow the racial wealth gap. So if you really want to solve the racial wealth gap, right, meaning do 80% or more to solve it, you probably need reparations policy. But there are things that you can do to make a 20%, 30% difference. And I'm going to talk about some of those in a minute. But a small investment here can have an outsized impact, is the concept of seeking a leverage point. So you have to map the system, identify leverage points. What are some examples of leverage points? Well, one example, this comes from the research of the economist Roz Chetty again, is looking for integrative opportunity bargains. So this is where you look for low-cost housing in higher opportunity areas. And this is where you can move long-term families. And there have been a lot of experiments on this, not just going back to Gautreaux or moving to opportunity, but the more recent one that has written about is called the CMTO, Creating Moves to Opportunity in Seattle, where they did this using housing choice voucher program policy to do this. And there are a number of places where you have great schools, you have healthy environments, and there's opportunity for this. But the key is it requires housing counselors. So housing counselors are actually how you get, because a lot of families don't have knowledge of where these bargains are. And so with housing counselors, you can identify those opportunities for families. A second would be policies that increase access to credit. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. A third would be removing unnecessary or excessive barriers to employment. And we know what a lot of those are. And they're not just ban the box. Ban the box is the most famous. This is where people who have criminal records are automatically screened, or if not automatically, shortly thereafter screened from receiving a job opportunity or even reviewing their application. And so ban the box policies are an example. But other examples would be job cards that have unnecessary requirements on them. So a leader here is Governor Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania, but other governors, other political leaders, where they're looking at job cards and saying, does this have a college degree requirement, where the job responsibilities don't really require that, right? That's an example. So policies to increase access to credit, this is really important. Too many individuals, regardless of what they're able to do, are unable to start businesses because of a lack of access to fair credit. The National Urban League has put out a report where it surveyed Black entrepreneurs and found that one of the largest complaints is they are shut out of traditional financing opportunities and starve of venture capital. And so it doesn't require, right, like millions and millions of dollars to do this. Microloans can actually help. Black and Latino borrowers start small businesses, and all across the country, people have ideas for businesses. They just don't have access to credit because of, again, intergenerational wealth inequalities, contemporary policies that deny access to wealth building. Here in California, we have the lowest rate of Black homeownership in the country. So obviously it's harder to build wealth through that vehicle, which is one of the largest vehicles for building wealth. So there's significant barriers to building wealth. We need to provide more mechanisms to access credit. And this is, again, an example of a leverage point where it doesn't necessarily cost a lot, but it can make a really big difference to reducing racial inequality in California. And so there's a number of places where they've done some of these microloans: St. Louis, Philadelphia, Iowa, for Black borrowers, and they've had tremendously positive outcomes. The problem is that many of these programs have either been shut down by legislatures or successfully challenged in court, so they need to be designed to survive challenges in court. I will say Prop 209 in California does not provide a barrier to this because Prop 209 only applies to employment, education, and contracting. So that's not an issue here. Employment barriers, I've already described a little bit about that. California is a leader, I should say, in banning non-compete clauses, which is this idea that if you work for Apple, you can't work for Google, but it also shockingly applies to things like fast food restaurants. So if you work at Burger King, you can't work for McDonald's. So this obviously becomes a huge barrier to employment options for a lot of people. And so California has stepped up in trying to address this. The problem is it still happens. You basically have to be aware that it's against the law, and then you have to challenge it, which is not always easy. So there's a lot of employment barriers that need to be dismantled that can help give people more access to opportunity. I've already discussed diplomas and job cards, so I'm not going to go through that. Number two, aim at systems and structures rather than people and individuals. It's incredibly tempting to look at the landscape of racial inequality and say, we need to just help people, and we should help people. But what a systems and structural analysis shows is that the best way to improve outcomes is actually to fix structures and systems and policies. And so what happens is if you map out the complex system, you can just help an individual and you can help a group of people, but it's actually, you're going to be helping more people, and you're going to be actually fixing the deeper causes if you look for those leverage points and you try to affect structural dynamics. So look for those places where you can spur positive feedback loops for greater change. And let me just explain, part of the reason that it's problematic just to use people-specific interventions is because most structural inequalities affect or harm more than just the affected group. So people-specific interventions tend to be either under or over-inclusive. What do I mean by that? Well, for example, if you have, you could think about a reparations policy, right? Which under most designs would only benefit people who are descendants of American slavery, right? But you also have a lot of Black Americans who are not ADOS, right? You might have Black Americans who are children or grandchildren of Caribbean or African immigrants. Maybe their grandparents or parents moved here in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and they have suffered through Jim Crow, and they have suffered through contemporary policies that cause racial inequality. A reparations policy, by targeting not just Black Americans, but Black Americans who are descended from slavery, would be under-inclusive in terms of, not necessarily remedying the harms of slavery, but under-inclusive in terms of helping Black Americans writ large, right? So it's one example. There's other examples too, but part of the challenge is that the people who aren't you can either help the people who aren't most disadvantaged or fail to reach the people also affected by structural arrangements. So there's lots of other examples I could give. Another example of one that might be, let me get to that in just a second. So let me give you an example of the curb cut effect, which was coined by Angela Glover Blackwell. I'm sure some of you have heard of this idea. This is the phenomenon where policies, technologies, or architectural features designed for one group can end up benefiting other people as a whole. So the specific example here is the curb cuts built into sidewalks were originally designed to help people with disabilities, but they end up helping other people as well. They end up helping families with children. They end up helping the elderly. They end up providing a structural benefit that is more broadly enjoyed and actually improves society as a whole. So this is one way to think about structural interventions as positive sum. You can target a problem, but it ends up actually serving a wider range of beneficiaries. So if well designed, such policies will improve outcomes not just for the most disadvantaged or the target group, but for the benefit of others as well. And so I can continue to talk about the over or under-inclusive nature of targeting people in a minute, but let me just talk about this for a second. Principle 3, fix the bottleneck rather than creating a workaround. It is so tempting when you look at a racial inequity to say we need to fix the bottleneck Like, for example, a workaround would be looking at the experience of affirmative action. Right? We have a bottleneck, and part of the problem is we have inequity in primary care, primary education systems, secondary education systems, total inequality at pre-K level, and that matriculates all the way up to disadvantages in admissions, right? And so the workaround is affirmative action. We create a special pathway, a set aside, and the famous case here is Bakke in the 1970s, where the University of California, Davis had set aside 15 seats for Black students, right? And so that was struck down, and of course, almost all the affirmative action cases that went to the Supreme Court, with the exception of the Grutter case, were struck down. Those policies were struck down. And now we saw from the Harvard, North Carolina cases, the court has struck down all affirmative action in higher education. But a workaround would be that instead of a workaround, fixing the bottleneck would actually be fixing the problem of higher education itself. So you would actually widen access to completely reform how universities do admission. So an example would be waiving or doing away with SAT, ACT, which is a huge debate right now, which I'm not going to get into entirely. But also, instead of saying, okay, we're just going to create special seats for disadvantaged or historically excluded groups, what if we just widen the pathway and expand admissions period, right? What if instead of Harvard just admitting or Princeton admitting 1,500 students, we did what the University of Toronto does, which is we'll double admissions, right? And that way we can get more students in. So fixing the bottleneck is often preferable to a workaround from a structural or systemic perspective. Principle 4, this is really important. Assess likely impacts. One of the things that a lot of local governments don't do is they don't actually look at potential racial impacts of their policies. So, in the environmental context, it's almost impossible to do anything without doing environmental impact, right? If you want to build a new home, if you want to build a building, if you want to open a museum, if you want to pave a road, you have to do an environmental impact. In the fiscal context, policymakers all the time have to evaluate their fiscal impacts. If you look at ballot initiatives, every ballot initiative will have guidance on what the fiscal impact is likely to be before voters can even vote. And legislators have to do the same thing. But oddly enough, we don't do that for race. How hard would it be to simply say, here's a policy, what is the likely racial impact? Boom. This helps us overcome the problem of indifference that I mentioned earlier. At least you can't pretend to be indifferent if you know that this is likely to happen. And again, it wouldn't be a barrier to doing something, it wouldn't be a complete barrier, but at least you would have informed policymakers. So I think racial impact assessments are very valuable, and they would help us overcome the problem of indifference and neglect. And number 5, and finally, set goals and be outcome oriented. I think I'm using a quote here from Milton Friedman with a bit of irony, right? Because he's a famous libertarian conservative economist. But I think his point here is actually well taken. He says, one of the great mistakes is to judge policies and programs by their intentions rather than their results. Amen. We should judge policies by their results, not their intentions. Be outcome oriented. And this is something that's really, really important. I would like to say, this is a provocation of mine. I think ineffective interventions are actually worse than nefarious ones. Because in an ineffective intervention, what happens is you build a coalition, you put a lot of energy and effort, and nothing happens, or worse, very little happens. So what happens is that it engenders cynicism and despair. Well, we tried that and it didn't work. And so that actually is very problematic. And so I say, beware leaders with good hearts who don't change systems. Beware the local mayor who everyone sees as, a good person, a good guy, but actually is unwilling to do the hard work to reform zoning laws or, invest in low-income housing or provide for affordable housing in their communities. Beware the people with good hearts who aren't willing to change systems. We need clarity around goals and objectives. If you don't want to use the SMART criteria, specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, time-bound, use something else. But clear goals and objectives is really important. One of the previous presenters, the previous group of presenters, which is phenomenal, said you need to have clarity in a number of ways. But I think what you need clarity is not process, clarity on goals and outcomes. You need to identify what are the outcomes we're trying to get and how do we get there. And beware also process. Beware process as a substitute for outcomes. So often it's hard to deal with these problems, right? We're dealing with deeply entrenched and embedded problems. And so we often resort back to the lowest hanging fruit. which is let's create some processes. Let's create a committee. Let's create, this is something I found in my study of commissions, right? It's just so easy to fall back on process-based solutions rather than actually changing and affecting policy. So this is my warning here. We must be relentlessly outcome oriented. This means more than simply caring, and it means more than just creating procedures, but creating outcomes that will disrupt the status quo and put us on a healthy trajectory. Here are my closing thoughts. Dismantling structural racial inequality is not impossible, but it is difficult to maintain a structural and systemic focus. It is much easier, in some sense, to spend energy on looking for the spider or trying to change hearts and minds. It can feel more cathartic, can feel more rewarding, even if ultimate outcomes remain the same or roughly the same. I would say if we do that, we have failed. We have to change outcomes. We have to dismantle the web. We can do it. We will do it. We must do it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your incredible presentation, Stephen. As a pastor, I have to say, at a point, I almost wished for an organ. You were preaching several points in that presentation, and that was phenomenal. I do want to give Commissioner Maldonado an opportunity to share any feedback or thoughts, insights, or questions before we open it up for public comment. Commissioner Maldonado.
Yeah, I mean, I just had a simple question. In a very litigious and politically sensitive environment that we are in right now, what would you say is your best approaches or that we should take in achieving sort of racial equity goals through policy while also taking heed to the very unique federal environment and also the civil lawsuit environment? A lot of times we talk about the federal government, but there are private actors who are suing over these issues. And I think it is incumbent upon us to be as preventative and reducing those risks as possible. What would you suggest, taking a lot of this into consideration? Because much of your presentation is buzzwords that are criminalized currently. So, how do we then navigate that, especially as we look to the next 2 years in particular?
It's a great question. It's a hard question. There's a lot of nuance. So first of all, in terms of approach, there's basically 3 approaches you can use. The first approach is what I call a courageous defiance, which is, we know what these executive orders say. We know that there are all these, groups that are trying to sue racial equity efforts, and you can just plow forward in defiance of them and let the court sort it out, or even lose in court. The opposite approach is sort of timidity, right? Over cautiousness, where it's like, well, if we do this, we're going to get sued. I actually think you need to be somewhere in the middle. You need to have some risk. You can't zero out risk. If you're just taking no risks, you're not really trying to make a difference. But you also should have what I call prudence. It's the prudent approach. So it's not overly risk averse, but it's also not defiantly courageous. So I think a middle course is where you go. We also need to understand the law. There is actually a lot more opportunity than people think. I gave the example of 209. I do a lot of guidance on 209. People don't actually understand 209. They have a mental conception of 209. Oh, 209 just prevents us doing anything about race. Not true. Not true at all. Again, it only applies to contracting, employment, and education. It doesn't apply to housing. It doesn't apply to healthcare. It doesn't apply to transportation. It doesn't apply to criminal justice. Go on and on and on. So actually having expertise where you're just not afraid, but you actually study the law, understand the law, and find the pathways around it, the safe harbors, which I've tried to provide guidance on the OBI website. There is a guidance that I created 2 years ago called Advancing Racial Equity Under Law or something like that. That's not the exact title. It actually does provide examples of how you navigate through this. A lot of the executive orders have either no effect, been blocked in court, or misstate the law. So I would be cautious about overreading some of those executive orders, and you just have to understand the law and understand where the law is going. It is possible to structure a lot of these policies in ways that can survive legal challenge. You just have to know how to do it. And there are very few people who do know. I'm one of them, but you have to know how to do it.
That's a fantastic answer, and I appreciate you. I have a whole little page of notes to the side.
Likewise. Again, fantastic. I believe Commissioner Tong had to step away for about 30 minutes. So if you have no further comments or questions, Commissioner Maldonado, we will open it up for public comment. Jess, are there any public comments?
Thank you, Chair Matthews. There are no public. Oh, we just got one in. There is
All right.
one virtual public comment. Maria Bearcat, you are welcome to begin when you are ready.
Thank you, commissioners and staff. And thank you, Stephen. It's wonderful to hear from you as always. I want to thank you so much for your ongoing clarity around Prop 209 and uplifting the incoming challenges that disparate impact study elimination might be posing to some of the work, especially around, as you call it, remediation, providing remedies, as well as the deep and important connections to meaningful reparations work. This is a through line for the commission as well. I wanted to uplift something that you noted around the importance of impact assessments, racial equity impact assessments specifically. In California, we have had HR 39, House resolution that required, or not that did not require, but let's see, created the opportunity for the Assembly to have racial equity impact assessments of legislation. We know that some of these bills, like HR 39, are not being implemented consistently or transparently. I just wanted to uplift also AB 1823, this legislative cycle, which would have created the requirement for state agencies to use racial equity impact assessments. Greenlining and the Racial Equity Coalition supported that bill this year, and it was held in appropriations, unfortunately, but we remain committed to supporting developing racial equity impact assessments with the commission. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you, Chair Matthews. We have another public comment from Leanne Dillon. Leanne, go ahead and begin when you are ready.
Is there a speaker there?
Oh, there we go. Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, fabulous. I was just talking to myself over here. Thank you, Jess and team holding down the Zoom. Leanne Dillon, Interim Program Director with State of Equity, she, her pronouns. I have been working with state agencies around racial equity since we launched the Capital Collaborative on Race and Equity in 2018 with our partners at Race Forward and the Government Alliance on Race and Equity. Stephen, what a pleasure to hear your voice and yes, Chair, hearing the gospel coming from Stephen. I wanted to highlight a couple points that just feel so powerful and relevant in this moment. One, that being outcome oriented is so important for government, especially related to racial equity work. And so thank you, Stephen, for the call to be rigorous, to have stamina in the pursuit of racial equity in this work. And that's why we know that an Office of Racial Equity would be a very important critical piece of infrastructure, especially given what is happening at the federal level, especially given the incredible work of California's Reparations Task Force in setting forth so many really clear practices and policies that administratively at this time could be implemented by state government. But there needs to be some leadership, there needs to be some guidance, there needs to be some way of coordinating the existing efforts that so many state agencies in California already have made incredible progress on and could be amplified. The impact could be greater if there was some level of coordination and support from a centralized body like an Office of Racial Equity. And so shout out to the staff with the Racial Equity Commission for the ways in which you're building bridges and continuing to pursue this work. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you, Chair Matthews. That concludes public comment for this item.
Thank you for your comment, I was trying to get off mute as well. If we have no additional public comments, I would again like to thank Stephen for an incredible presentation. And we are about halfway through the agenda, but I think we are further than that in terms of the time remaining. So at this time, we're going to take a shorter lunch break, which will allow us to get back at 12:15, and we will probably finish in another hour or so once we do return with remaining agenda items, because the committee presentations and report out should go fairly quickly since we do not have a quorum. So we will take a almost 30-minute break. I think it's 27 minutes, and we'll see you back at 12:15 p.m. See you soon. It is 12:15, so as soon as the commissioners are back, we will get started. All right, welcome back. We will now resume the meeting. The commission will move to agenda item number 7, evaluating the racial equity framework. Commission will hear from the Possibility Lab at UC Berkeley. This presentation will provide an update on the evaluation work supporting the use of the racial equity framework, including how the commission can think about goals, measures, learning, and accountability as the framework moves into implementation and practice. I will now pass it to the presenters. I don't know who we have here, but the floor is yours.
Fantastic. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's so nice to be here today. Thank you for having us. My name is Lindsay Maple. I am the Deputy Director at the UC Berkeley Possibility Lab. I'm here with my colleague, Aparna Stephen, and she is the project lead on this project, working with the Racial Equity Commission. We're here today to walk you all commissioners through the approach and methods that our team has been developing for evaluating the racial equity framework across the entire state. The Possibility Lab is really focused on making sure that we provide community-oriented policy-making decisions. And so our focus is making sure that we're hearing from and talking to the people who will be actually working towards enacting different elements of the framework at state agencies, departments, offices, boards, commissions, councils. So just to set the stage, the Possibility Lab has been working with the Racial Equity Commission since its launch in 2024. Our initial work involved conducting a statewide asset analysis where we documented existing racial equity efforts and goals across state agencies and departments. That work, along with a change management literature review that we produced, fed directly into the development of the racial equity framework itself. The current phase of our work builds on that foundation and is focused on supporting the commission in building tools and guidance for actually evaluating the racial equity framework. I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Aparna Stephen, to walk us through how we're thinking about the next stage of this work.
Thank you, Lindsay. Just before I get into the nitty-gritties of the approach, I just wanted to take the stage. I just wanted to set the stage for our the foundation of our approach, and this is what we're calling the North Stars to Action link. And what we're trying to do here is that we wanted a very clear, coherent line of sight from California's big picture vision for racial equity and connecting it down to what agencies do on an everyday basis. So that is what the link is explaining, and I will get into it in more detail here. We're going to walk through a concrete example just to make it a little bit more tangible. And the example that we're going to be focusing on today is from the housing domain. So at the top of the chain here, we have North Stars. North Stars are these broad, multi-decade visioning statements or directional goals for where we're hoping California needs to go within that domain. So for example, for housing, we have this vision statement that says, by 2050, all communities in California have equitable access to stable, affordable housing and the wealth building opportunities that come with it. Now that we have a broad vision statement, our next task is to make that slightly more concrete and more specific. And we do this by identifying what we are calling the population level key impact indicators. Key impact indicators are some of the factors that drive stable, affordable housing in California. So these are the more tangible, proximate outcomes that are contributing towards this North Star of stable, affordable housing for all. And some of the indicators that we've identified within this domain are mortgage access, rent burden, and housing displacement. These are just a sampling of the many indicators that we've identified just to give you a sense of what we are working with. After we identify some of these key impact indicators, we're also trying to be very clear about how we define them so that we can track and measure them consistently over time. So for each of the key impact indicators, we are clearly defining what it means to measure that indicator. So for example, for mortgage access, we will measure this by looking at the mortgage denial rates and the loan origination rates for different categories of applicants. And for each of these key impact indicators, we're also trying to identify a publicly available, racially disaggregated, and consistently updated data source so that we can make sure that we're tracking progress on these indicators. So for this example, the mortgage access data will come from data that is submitted via the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, for example. Now, the chain so far has focused on these larger state level population outcomes. We also need to connect this to what state agencies are doing on a day-to-day basis. So the next half of the chain will focus on what agencies and entities can do. So the first half of this chain is what we're calling the entity objective and key results. So agencies may choose to set their own objectives, which are these specific time-bound internal goals. They're not externally imposed. They're internal goals that they may choose to set for themselves to move the needle towards a key impact indicator in their domain. For example, an agency involved in housing might have an objective of furthering housing fairness towards improving mortgage access. Now, agencies may also choose to measure their own progress towards achieving these objectives, and they might choose to attach a key result to this objective. So key results can be the metrics, they can be milestones, but they simply how agencies may choose to measure or assess their own progress towards the objectives. For example, a key result to measure progress towards improving housing fairness could be having increased diversity of loan officers who are more representative of undisturbed communities. Now, connecting this all the way back to the everyday actions or the strategies or initiatives that agencies may choose to take to sort of achieve their internal objective is the last step. And we call this entity actions, entity initiatives. And one example of how an agency might choose to increase consumer access to more diverse loan officers would be conducting outreach to community-based organizations of mortgage professionals or conducting outreach to CBOs who work in certain communities to ensure that there are diverse loan officers who are representative of those communities. So this is how we are hoping the link makes sense. The entity actions sort of drive towards the entity objectives. The entity objectives make progress on the population level key impact indicators. And any progress on the population level key impact indicators then sort of drives us towards this larger North Star. Now that we've walked through an example, I would also like to take a few minutes to walk the commissioners through our proposed North Star areas. So the executive order that established this commission had about 24 different domains, and this was wide-ranging from housing to healthcare to criminal justice to broadband access. So what we've done here is organize them into 7 North Star areas where we have sort of grouped related domains. They sort of reflect where racial disparities in California are the most severe. And we've kept them broad enough so that every state agency can see their own work contributing to one or more of the North Star areas. And so these are the 7 North Star areas that we have, which are civil rights and participation, criminal justice, economic opportunity and wealth gap, education, environmental justice, health outcomes and access, and housing and land use. Now, the sort of foundation that guides all of the work that agencies will do in these North Stars, any sort of evaluation work, is guided by the guidance that has been set forth in the racial equity framework itself. Okay, now that we've outlined our approach, I would also just like to talk you through the specific methods that we're following. And there are 2 main research methods. One is desk research, and our desk research is oriented towards achieving a few different goals. We are reviewing goals and priorities from community-based organizations and advocacy organizations just to make sure that we have the framing of the North Stars right, that we're not missing any gaps or any current conversations that are happening on these North Stars. We are also reviewing a lot of literature to make sure that we can substantiate these North Star areas and provide evidence to why these making progress on these North Stars are important for the state of California. We are also looking at vetting all of the data sources to make sure they're publicly available and consistently updated. And lastly, we are looking at a lot of strategic plans, annual plans, and other documents that are put forth by agencies and departments to make sure that their work can feed into one of the key impact indicators, that we're documenting their existing objectives and key results that they might have, and any ongoing racial equity efforts that they have as well. On the other hand, we also want to make sure that everything that we're building makes sense to the workers and the leaders that will be doing this work and also evaluating their own progress. So we're also engaging with state agencies, state leaders, and staff. We are primarily conducting informational interviews just to get a sense of what it is that they're already doing, where are the gaps, and what they would like support around. We are also sense checking our framework or our approach that we presented today, just to make sure that it resonates with the people that are actually going to be doing this work. We're also trying to surface the challenges and barriers that agencies and staff face in setting their own internal goals and tracking their progress to see what sort of guidance we can provide that would be helpful to them. And once we have these insights, we'll draft the evaluation guidance. And once we have a draft, we'll go back to the same folks to get more feedback and to revise them. And this is just a snapshot of the work that we have coming up ahead. So for the next 2 months, we are talking to staff and talking to agency leaders, and we are finalizing all of the population level North Stars and key impact indicators. In the fall, we will then take the insights from the interviews and draft the state entity guidance and also have feedback sessions with them to revise them. And by December of this year, we're hoping to finalize and present to you all an evaluation strategy. I also just want to thank the commissioners and also the racial equity staff for all of their thoughtful feedback. We've been working very closely with Adriana and Jess, and they've been extremely helpful in streamlining our approach. And we're happy to take any questions about any of the specific elements we've covered today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for that great presentation. And I'll open it up before we open it up to for public comment to any of the commissioners. If you have questions, thoughts, insights, feedback, anything you'd like to share.
I'll probably do a little bit more report out the chair, but I just do wanted to appreciate Possibility Lab for putting this recommendations together. And I had a chance to look at some of the material. I was quite impressed by their approach. So thank you for the work.
Yeah, I want to echo Commissioner Tong's comments. I really am grateful for this. I have 2 notes that I took, and this is more so for staff, so less for questions. But the first one is that I really liked their illustrative examples. And I think for myself, as it relates to designing the implementation toolkits for DOF, I really think that putting in illustrative examples and connecting through lines the way they did in this report is an approach that I would want to take. I would love Possibility Lab's support on potentially creating custom toolkits per each of the North Star agencies, because when you think about getting people to logically be able, like administrators or staff, to logically be able to see how this is relevant to their scope, these illustrative examples that very relevantly connects to the agencies and the apparatus they work with would allow them to see the possibility in being able to implement these things. I wanted to just underpin that I think this is an opportunity to bring multiple of our advisors from this session together, because I can see Stephen playing a very big role in sort of how these illustrative examples could be very much rooted in what he suggested be a legal understanding. He said there's a lot of misnomers and demystification around legal barriers and heightened risk. So I think it would be great if like these illustrative examples could be very much underpinned with like legal reasoning, and that could be a very robust sort of portion of the template. And then lastly, for one of my other recommendations we're going to talk about in my section is the community input index. And I really just like the way Possibility Lab frames sort of this gathering data and analysis piece. I can really see a lot of fruits in sort of the templates that I want to create through DOF. And in particular, this is where I see the UCLA students really coming in and sort of their elements around inclusivity and ethical community engagement. I think combining Possibility Labs innovations around gathering data gathering and analysis for community, and then how UCLA really frames sort of community inclusivity and ethical engagement, those two pieces coming together, I think could be very great sort of starting points for the community input index. So this is more so notes for the future.
Noted. We got it. Thank you, Commissioner Maldonado. Much appreciated.
Sorry, Chair. I just wanted to gather it for the record.
Brilliant ideas, and I did want to give staff an opportunity. If you have any clarifying questions, he shared a lot, and it was all brilliant. So any clarifying questions before we do open it back up to the presenters? All right. So I know you said you got it. I just wanted to give you that opportunity to ask any clarifying questions there. Fantastic. And then for the presenters, Lindsay and Aparna, I hope I pronounced that okay. Any other thoughts or words of wisdom, advice to share with us?
Not immediately. Appreciate all of you for allowing us to come and share this with you, and also just really excited and eager to continue these conversations. I think that we're still in early kind of engagement strategizing, and so we want to make sure that these recommendations and the outcomes that we're producing are community informed, and to Commissioner Maldonado's point, like will be useful and logically sound to the folks that are actually receiving kind of this guidance. So appreciate you all for allowing us to speak today.
Oh, our honor, pleasure. Thank you so much again for the great work that you all have been doing throughout this process, also for the presentation today. All right, if there are no other comments or questions from the commissioners, then we will open it up to the public. So Jess, any public comments?
There are no public comments for this item. I pass it back to you, Chair Matthews.
All right, I hope folks came back from lunch. So we'll move on to our next agenda item, number 8, which is an update on an Office of Racial Equity. And we are honored to have Manpreet Dylan Brar and Anna Kumira from Vital Research, who will share an update on the research memo they have been working on for the Racial Equity Commission. I will now pass it to the presenters.
Thank you, Chair Matthews. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. We did come back from lunch, so hopefully others did as well. It's great to see you all. Thank you again to the commission staff and commissioners for the opportunity to present on this brief again. But really having a complete brief that's included in your meeting materials as well. And I think I just want to shout out also one of the public comments that was shared earlier. There has to be a way to coordinate all the equity efforts across the state. So that's where hopefully this brief can provide just additional information to help the commission's future efforts to really make that happen, make an Office of Racial Equity happen in California. Since 2024, Vital Research has had the privilege to really work with and learn from the commission as a research and consulting partner, really supporting by way of producing briefs or memos as resources, just additional information to take into account. So we'll take a few minutes to present an overview of the brief. And for this brief, we explored the potential of establishing an Office of Racial Equity, really to sustain the commission's work beyond the planned sunset in 2030. So this brief, I want to acknowledge from the get-go, builds on prior policy memos that have been put out by various entities, and just highlights key considerations for the commissioners as you're thinking about the long-term sustainability of the work. And we summarize potential roles for such an office, provide examples from other states, and just some high-level funding considerations, really emphasizing, I think, what's been shared with earlier presentations on the importance of shared governance, working in partnership, and community engagement to help embed racial equity into really everyday government decision making. So looking ahead, I think the question is really whether an office of racial equity can help sustain the commission's legacy. So I just want to share a little bit more about just the information that's included in that brief here. But I want to pause for a moment and just let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Manpreet Delombarar, and I'm a senior researcher at Vital Research, and we're a social science research and evaluation consulting firm. We're based in Los Angeles, and much of our work is with state governments and nonprofit partners, really using culturally responsive and equitable evaluation approaches to do this work. So it's my pleasure to also be joined by my colleague, Anna Kimura, who led the development of this brief and will be co-presenting with me. And with that, I'll turn it over to Anna to get us started.
Yeah, thank you, Winfrey, for the introduction. I'm happy to be here. My name is Anna Kimura. I am a senior research associate at Vital Research and really had the privilege of working on several different briefs and memos over the, I guess, years with the Racial Equity Commission, and we're happy to present this one as well. So I'm going to start off just kind of talking through what's covered in the brief and thinking really about what does it mean to sustain the commission's work. So as we all know, the Racial Equity Commission was established through an executive order, and it will sunset in 2030. And where we're at now, the Racial Equity Framework, which was part of the charge, was published last December. The commission is now working on implementing and kind of thinking through how do you operationalize racial equity within California's different government entities. But we know that change takes time, and we need to really account for the time it will take for government entities to really adopt the recommendations in the racial equity framework. And so it's really important to consider how can the work of the commission and what you all are doing now can be sustained beyond 2030, and what infrastructure is needed to make that happen. And so for this memo that we put together, we looked at and consulted several different sources. And that includes, we looked at examples of other racial equity focused government entities, whether that's across the country or within California. We also spoke with key partners who were involved in the establishment of the Racial Equity Commission. And then we also received guidance and input from commissioners themselves and also the commission employees. And ultimately here we're focusing on looking at the possible functions of a racial equity commission an office of racial equity, and the possible ways of establishing an office of racial equity in California. So first, just thinking through possible roles. So I think the first role that an Office of Racial Equity could serve as is a centralized entity, which has also been discussed in that public comment as well. But it's really thinking about how can a centralized entity guide, inform, and coordinate racial equity work across California's government entities, whether that's state or local levels. And it's important also to note that racial equity work is still the responsibility of individual government entities. And so the Office of Racial Equity would not replace that work, but it's really to kind of help standardize, streamline the work, make sure, there's not necessarily duplicative work happening, and also be able to hold government entities accountable to their work. And then second, an Office of Racial Equity can also be a provider of technical assistance in terms of thinking about implementing the racial equity framework. And, the commission is charged with providing technical assistance already, and so the Office of Racial Equity could just continue this really critical work to make sure that government entities have the tools, the know-how to implement the recommendations in the framework. And then third, the office can also serve as a connector, looking across, state and local government entities for areas of synergy. We know that government entities are at different places in terms of where they're at in their racial equity work. Some have been doing this work for a long time, many years, and others might just be getting started. And so it can be helpful to have a way to connect these different bodies and kind of share successes and also lessons learned together. And then finally, the Office of Racial Equity can also serve as an entity to ensure accountability and sustainability, and really kind of holding government entities accountable to their racial equity goals. So, for example, an Office of Racial Equity could request information on racial equity indicators from different government entities. These indicators could be, decided collaboratively with the entities themselves, but these indicators could then be kind of like annual checkpoints where you would ask for information, how is progress going for these different indicators, for example. So, in some, there are different roles that an Office of Racial Equity could take on, and that includes roles that the Commission is already doing now, and it can also expand beyond what the Commission is doing. But there's several possibilities that I think should definitely be considered. And so now I'll turn it over to Manpreet, who will talk about possible ways to establish an Office of Racial Equity.
Thanks, Anna. So I think we just, by looking at other places that have done this, other states, and speaking with key partners, we were trying to figure out just what are the possible approaches? How do we get to this? How do we make this happen? And there's 4 potential pathways that we identified. So one is through an executive order, just as the commission, as it is right now, was established. Another option is through a ballot measure, or a government reorganization plan or legislation. And I think as you just heard me say those last 3, you probably were thinking that it does take a lot more time, a lot more effort. So we included some examples of government entities that have been created through each of these approaches in the brief. And these pathways are also not mutually exclusive, so they can be combined. And one of the options that we highlighted in this brief, based on our research and really the conversations and discussions we had, is just hopefully going through a 2-step approach. So first, establishing an Office of Racial Equity through an executive order, and then pursuing legislation to really provide that longer term stability. And that being because, as we know, this work takes time, especially to see the fruits of the labor. So just a couple of additional considerations that we've included. So as you're considering the future of the Commission's work, funding as well as sustainability are going to be important, right? Regardless of how the office is established. So we identified a few funding sources or opportunities, such as through through braided funding approaches, for example, that can help reduce reliance on just one single source, one funding source, especially as we're thinking about sustainability. And then the office could also be housed in different places. So another consideration is to think about what makes sense as really leveraging those key partnerships that the commission and commission staff are already building. And one example we highlighted is the governor's office, where the commission is currently located. So it's within existing entities like thinking about GovOps. So this brief, we just provide kind of the importance of also just that shared governance, and longer term success is going to require stronger partnerships across government entities, but also having the systems and approaches that administration set up already will help sustain the efforts of the commission's work as it stands currently. So finally, I think as we think about timeline, it's really going to depend on collaboration with partners involved in the process. And there is time, as the commission is currently doing its work, to think about the establishing and which route makes the most sense, and also identifying key partners that you can leverage along the way. So lots more information in the 5 or 6 page brief that you have in your meeting materials. But I just want to acknowledge again that this builds on prior policy memos and really draws on insights from individuals who shared their perspectives with us on the possibilities for establishing an Office of Racial Equity in California. And we also really appreciate the input by the commissioners and commission staff throughout the process. And I want to especially thank the commission staff for their partnership and really your thoughtful collaboration over the past couple of years. It's been a privilege to support the work by just providing research and information and resources as you're doing your work. So thank you again for your time and your attention today. And we look forward to hearing your thoughts and questions and discussion.
Thank you so much, Manpreet and Anna. And more than the brief itself, too, just the work over the years in support of the efforts and working with the staff of the Racial Equity Commission. Truly appreciate it. Are there any comments, questions, or discussion from the commission before we open it up for public comment?
I just have one quick, I don't know if it's a comment or more question. I know the presenter, especially Manpreet, have talked about the funding because coming from someone who used to run GovOp agency, and there's often conversation about, hey, these kind of cross organization type of offices will be housed as a GovOp agency as an option. But the immediate next question is who's funding that? Where's the funding come from? So I'm curious, doing the study here, that in looking at other area, was there any funding offset that could be recommended in terms of, by doing this, perhaps you can offset the funding or redirect the funding somewhere so it's not a net new funding to the state. That's number one, and net new as in to the general fund. Number two, whether there are other public-private partnership opportunity to kind of help the establishment of the office.
Thank you, Commissioner Tong. That was a really good question. And of course, that's like the practical, the logistics to making this happen. I wouldn't say there was like one particular private partner, public partnership that we can highlight, but I think one of the things we definitely saw was using braided funding approaches or using multiple sources rather than just relying on one source seemed to be the successful aspect of, especially as other offices have been established that we looked at across the country. So I think philanthropic support is a great way to get started. For example, thinking about those partnerships and agency contributions, but then thinking about like state appropriation funds, those are going to take longer. Or, just I think there's several different potential funding sources that can be identified, and thinking about how those can be leveraged together rather than just relying on one is the best way to move forward, especially in this budget environment. And I think that's as much as I feel like I can say as not someone who's involved in the budgeting process for the state. But what we saw was definitely having multiple sources. In other examples, that was the way to go. Anna, anything you would add?
Commissioner Tong, any follow-up or additional questions?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. All right. Any other insights or final words of advice from our presenters before we open it up for public comment?
I think I will just say thank you for doing the work and pushing it forward. We know it takes time and there is time, but we just have appreciated the opportunity to work with you. But I know you have lots to accomplish going forward, and we're looking forward to seeing all of the work in action. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Again, we appreciate your presentation and answering our questions. All right, we're now going to open it up to public comment on agenda item number 8, update on an Office of Racial Equity. Jess, any public comments?
Thank you, Chair Matthews. We have one online public comment. So Maria Barakat, I will open it up to you, and time will start when you do.
Thank you all so much for that presentation and for your robust work on this and providing a pathway, potential pathways forward for this critical piece of infrastructure for the state of California. Since the pandemic, the Racial Equity Coalition has worked towards our guiding star, an Office of Racial Equity, because we know that from experience, efforts to advance racial equity require strong leadership buy-in, authority to convene secretaries and statewide equity staff, to de-silo, and it needs the full resources to be able to provide TA to the full statewide enterprise. We're concerned with what we're seeing so far this year, and we understand there's challenges to this work. But it appears that their support for this commission's work has stalled in the early part of 2026 due to a lack of appointments and a lack of an executive director. So it's critical right now that the commission, that partners work together to move this work forward in the interim between transitions. I ask that commissioners consider advocating for your commission, for our commission, for the People's Commission, with the current administration and the incoming administration, and consider bold outreach to legislators to start building power for this critical piece in this next phase. Thank you for all your work.
Thank you for your comment. Any other public comments, Jess?
That is all the public comments for this item. Thank you, Chair Matthews.
All right, thank you. All right, well, we are moving right along, so we'll skip our final break and move to the committee updates and discussions. Again, we do not have a quorum, so we won't vote on any actions at this time. We'll save those for our special meeting. We'll move forward first with the Budget Equity Committee report. That is you, Commissioner Maldonado.
Thank you, Chair Matthews. So first, I just want to say thank you to members of the coalition, in particular, Maria, Vince, Alejandra, and everyone, because much of what the Budget Equity Committee's top priorities are was informed from a lot of their feedback. So we have 3 priorities that we're going to be taking up. The first one, as I mentioned earlier, is the creation of a community input index that could be offered as a tool in collaboration with DOF. Hopefully, Commissioner Tong can kind of help inform that as well with her background and experience. And then the second one is an index tool. So more on the spend side of creating an equity index tool. And I think City of San Diego and LA County have made presentations on their index tools. So not only referencing what some of the coalition members have brought to the table, but also our presenters in the past. And then one that I'm most passionate about, and that is giving the people information. So the hopeful, maybe potential establishment of a live interactive public facing dashboard where the public can get more of a real-time dashboard that is more interactive. I think all of our experts have talked about plain language being necessary and clarity being necessary. So I think something that utilizes the best of AI, the best of interactiveness, the best of user interface to make sort of a public-facing dashboard sort of very user-friendly for the public to know how their money is being spent. And I just wanted to make as a final note both what Eric said earlier from my hometown of Riverside County around how the work that we do here can apply to local municipalities. I think the work that Budget Equity Committee is doing is totally replicable and totally something that can be done at a local municipal level. So I look forward to those tools being applicable to local municipalities as well. So that was my updates. I don't know, Commissioner Tong or Chair Matthews, if you have any questions.
Fantastic. Commissioner Tong, any thoughts, feedback, questions?
I appreciate the ability to work with you further, Commissioner, to look at the feasibility of pursuing this kind of oversight in the oversight is not the right word, advisory on the budget, because it takes the right amount of resources to get things done, and I appreciate your focus on that.
All resources, yes.
And the work being prioritized. Thank you, Commissioner Maldonado. I love the concept of dashboards. I'm a huge dashboards person, so lots of great ideas, and so looking forward to moving those things forward. Thank you both for your thoughts, comments. We'll open it up for public comment now at this time. Jess, any public comments on this agenda item?
There are no public comments for this item. Back to you, Chair Matthews.
All right, we will now move on to our next committee discussion, which is the evaluation committee discussion. I think you may have the next couple, Commissioner Tong. So I'll kick it over to you to provide considerations on the framework development and implementation.
Thank you. I do have an internet issue, so hopefully I'm not too, much trouble coming in. You guys are hearing me okay. I just thank you, Chair, for, teeing this up. The Commission has completed the major milestone on the racial equity framework, and then the work is now looking at the next phase of it. I believe that, especially you guys have seen the presentation earlier by Possibility Lab, a great evaluation approach will really help the commission to understand whether the framework itself is actually useful, practical, and leading to improve the racial equity alignment, the goals that this commission trying to achieve overall. I look at the evaluation is not just about compliance or reporting, but it really should be something that the commission, help the commission to develop as recommendations, including best practices and strategies for evaluating the alignment of the commission equity framework. Again, kudos to the Possibility Labs in presenting their recommendation on how to further develop this out, and which will help the commission to think through how to evaluate, these implementation of the framework in a very practical manner moving forward. Just a couple of helpful focus area I think worth highlighting is how would the government entities to use the framework, what tools and strategies are to be adopted, and what supports the agency and the local government that they will be really, really helpful to them, but mainly what barrier that will show up as preventing them from moving forward. And the most important is what are the community feedback on a constant basis and on an iterative basis as this is moving forward, how they're seeing whether this is effective or not. This is where I would, want to continue to have the conversations with the commissioners and members of the staff to think about how do we making sure that as these measures are being developed for evaluation, what are the mechanism, following commissioner's recommendation on dashboard on the funding side, what about these measures being very transparent to the community and the public so that they can see on a regular basis on the impact it's making in the community. So yeah, that's a report on that.
Thank you so much. And we know you have more to share on the next committee in just a moment. But before we move forward, any additional comments, questions, or discussion from the commission? All right, I think I saw you shake your head no, Commissioner Maldonado. Thank you for that. Yeah, no further thoughts, questions, or insights on my end as well. We will open it up to public comment on agenda item number 9, the evaluation committee report. Jess, do we have any public comments?
There are no public comments for this item. Thank you, Chair Matthews.
All right, we were cruising right along. Agenda item number 10, the implementation and technical assistance committee report. Again, Commissioner Tong, that is you. So I'll kick it over to you for an update on the implementation and technical assistance work.
Yes, thank you. I'll just do a very brief report out on this one, specific focusing on the technical assistant portion of the committee's work. Again, providing the technical assistant are really, I believe it's a critical part of the next phase of the commission's work. You have the framework, you have an evaluation approach coming up, but now it is, what it would take for the government entities to utilize those tools and strategies so they can, execute on the outcomes that this commission's framework has laid out. And I think it's also important to articulate and explain how the technical assistant would help people to understand, how to apply the tool in the real situation, and from plain language and easy accessible tools that could help them deal with implementation as when it come out as we move forward. I feel like it's an important aspect of making sure the commission continue to advise this work through the life of this commission until 2030. There are some recent examples I was being briefed on that the CalHR, so the California Department of Human Resources, have done a technical assistant presentation and provides, a walkthrough of the framework to the state entities. and then get a feedback from them by reading the framework. How is it connecting to their work? How they can see it, bring it to a reality in implementing as part of their day-to-day. And from that survey, 94% understood the framework's purpose after that briefing session, and then 88% felt that they were confident in applying the framework to their work. That said, as much as it was good to see that there's a clear interest in the framework, I do believe that the entities that would benefit from looking into more practical examples, again, plain language, and then the space to connect with their peers so that they have a better sense on how to exercise their programmatic responsibilities and the approach for making this happen. So I think that is where the technical assistance from this commission would be helpful in bringing those day-to-day or practical examples so it can serve as a reference point in their day-to-day work. That's the end of my report.
All right, thank you so much, Commissioner Tong. We'll open it up again for any discussion, questions, feedback, or insights. Commissioner Maldonado? All right, fantastic. Good. We'll open it up now for public comment. Jess, any public comments on this agenda item?
There are no public comments for this agenda item. Back to you.
All right, we are moving right through the committee reports. Our next committee discussion is regarding our data committee discussion. And Commissioner Richardson is unable to attend today's meeting. So Dylan Turner-Keener from the commission team will provide a program update related to the data committee and areas for future discussion related to data collection, analysis, data safety, and implementation of the racial equity framework. Dylan, I will pass it over to you.
Thank you, Chair Matthews. So on behalf of the Data Committee, this portion of the agenda is intended to really gather commissioners your input on how data can continue to support not only the implementation of the framework, but also strengthen our community engagement sessions. I'm going to pose 2 questions for discussion, and I do recognize that these questions are broad and that there are many racial equity focused areas and intersections across communities, systems, and data. But for today, staff would really like to ground in this conversation in issues currently being considered for our next upcoming visits within these next 2 months, including housing, health equity, sexual orientation, and gender identity data and services. So to start, I would really welcome commissioners your thoughts on this first question. Are there emerging data tools, technologies, or approaches the program team should consider to explore to support more equitable decision-making in these focus areas? And Commissioner Maldonado, I also have been taking notes on some of the tools that you referenced for the indexes as well.
So thank you for the question. I'll let Commissioner Tong respond in just a minute, but I did want to point out Commissioner Maldonado actually had to sign off at 1 o'clock. So it's just 2 of us here. This may be a question, if it's not super urgent, that we save where there are more commissioners who can speak to it, or maybe bring it back at that time. But Commissioner Tong, if you have something that you feel is urgent and they've got to look into it right away, we can certainly take that feedback right now. Okay.
I echo your recommendation. We can probably defer this.
All right. Like I said, I know Commissioner Maldonado probably would have thoughts, but he did have to sign off, and we were moving pretty quickly. So, yeah, sorry that we'll have to potentially postpone that question for later, Dylan.
No, it's totally fine. Rather be able to get everyone's input than just a select few. I totally understand. That being said, I'm going to kind of skip the next question because again, it's just wanting to gather some more recommendations specifically for like CBOs, state agencies. But thank you, commissioners. Please, if there's anything that y'all do think of in the background, please feel free to follow up with staff and send some of those recommendations along the way. Again, this better helps connect the commission's work in data, but also implementation, technical assistance, and then also this upcoming 3-day engagement plan.
So much. All right, any clarifying questions or discussion, Commissioner Tong? Okay. Fantastic. We'll open it up for any public comment. There happen to be public comments. Jess, any public comment?
There are no public comments for this item. Back to you.
I hope folks are still out there. We'll see. We'll move on to our next committee discussion, which is a community engagement committee discussion. And again, I believe Dylan will be providing that update related to the Community Engagement Committee and the Commission's community engagement work. Dylan, I'll kick it back over to you again.
Thank you, Chair Matthews. So building on top of this 3-day engagement model that Adriana shared earlier, thank you. Staff are refining our community engagement approach from broad listening to be more focused, as well as issue specific oriented in conversations. And again, I thank Jess for being able to develop this new approach. It's exciting. But during our framework development, the sessions really centered on 3 broad questions about what communities valued, what they wanted to improve, and then also what government needed to know. And as the commission moves into this implementation phase, staff are wanting to tailor these questions to be more intentional so that community feedback can also inform the day 3 technical assistance and action planning that Adriana highlighted. Before each visit, staff will review local data, identify key issue areas, and look at what local government, community partners, and state agencies may already be doing. This will help us develop a stronger day 1 questions that are specific to community and can produce feedback useful for day 3. The goal is not limit to what community can share. Rather, the goal is to create enough focus so community feedback can be connected to the right agencies, partners, resources, and technical assistance opportunities. Staff would also like to use commissioners' expertise for more intentionally than before for each engagement, including input on some of these focus areas, facilitation approach, sharing the drafted questions, stakeholder connections, as well as relevant resources. Overall, these shifts will be able to keep community voices and lived experiences at the center, but also while helping staff better connect what is heard to support the implementation process. So I'm just going to recap and highlight some of our upcoming community engagement sessions since there has been some shifts. So our last session was in Fresno, and we met with community members to hear directly about their experiences, as well as their priorities and concerns. One reflection that really stuck with the team was, quote, "We appreciate the vision of the commission and the work you have all done, but we would like to feel the results." And that feedback helps reinforce that communities want these tangible outcomes from the framework to be more experienced in their daily lives. And it also speaks to how we're pivoting towards more of these specific focus areas, curating questions to help dive into deeper feedback that can support the framework process. So our upcoming visit will be in Klamath next month. So staff were preparing to host an information booth to be able to attend the Salmon Festival on August 15th with the Yurok tribe specifically and other tribal communities who are attending. This booth will include sharing the completed framework and bringing also targeted resources that respond to what we heard during our last visit last year in Klamath. And during this visit, community and tribal members are going to elevate concerns that we heard already. So we're really making sure our resources are based on that feedback that we heard from our last session that's centered on high cost of housing, for example, protecting, preserving the natural land as well as river. As we heard in our previous visit, they want a significant land back moment. And so there's been this revitalization of the salmon returning to the river. So it's very significant, as well as accessible support services. So in response, me and other staff members have been connecting with other state agencies, specifically SGC, which is the Strategic Growth Council, and HCD, which is Housing and Community Development, to compile some of these resources related to housing, land preservation, and infrastructure development. So just to give an example of some of the resources that have been collected from SGC, there is the Transformative Climate Communities Program. And this program really empowers Californians from really disadvantaged communities to choose their own strategies on how to achieve major environmental impacts as well as health and economic benefits while also reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So keeping in mind climate sensitivities. And then we also found the Funding Availability Community Resilience Centers program. And this makes strategic investments to fund planning, construction, and retrofit of communities' resilience centers and advance local communities' long-term capacity. So again, getting back at that infrastructure development. Um, HCD, we're still collecting resources, so resources are still pending. But when we are dispersing these resources, staff is going to follow up with our agency contacts and compile each of these resources and guidance on the NOFA, which is the Notice of Funding Availability, really making sure we have these key informations included in the resources that we'll be sharing out. And we're going to organize them according to the tribal issues that we heard earlier and hand out those resources at our booth to tribal members. I'm going to pause there for a second because I said a lot, just to see if there's any comments from commissioners before I segue into Bishop.
I think you're good to continue.
Awesome, thank you. So our next visit will be in Bishop. So we're beginning planning now. And so our visit will be in September, and our engagement is going to be focused on rent burden communities and affordable housing shortages in the region. Staff is working with Cerro Coso Community College as a potential host partner for the convenings, and we're excited to connect with a partner that is very knowledgeable about the region as well as the local community context. Additionally, staff is also gathering local data and are in conversations with the California Department of Housing and Community Development to help inform, again, some of these focus areas, questions for community, and again, really building upon this day 3 approach for that implementation and bridging those connections. And then lastly, we're going to be going to San Diego. So again, making sure that we're planning both events because it takes a long time and really want to make sure this new approach is effective and most importantly, impactful. So we're going to visit San Diego in October. And this focus area is really going to be focused on the LGBTQIA plus community. This has been a focus group that we really wanted to raise up this year. And staff has met with the County of San Diego, their epidemiologists, to review their recently published adult LGBTQ population in San Diego County brief, as well as dashboard. And the conversation was really helpful for staff to really understand what are some of the regional contexts, limits to the availability of the data collection, the care that went into documenting community experiences related to health, also ACEs for adverse child experiences, as well as other key indicators. And we're now working to develop community questions that can build on the existing work and help gather additional lived experiences from the LGBTQIA plus residences and partners. Staff welcomes commissioners' input again on how to help shape this engagement. And again, we have been in conversations with Commissioner Salas, who's been very helpful in informing this process as well, to really include how can we create a thoughtful day 1 community gathering and identify meaningful technical assistance connections for that day 3, especially as community serving organizations continue to navigate reduced services as well as shrinking funding sources. And I'll pause there.
I know Commissioner Tong may have some thoughts. You did share a lot. I just wanted to say before I forget, I know you all are preparing a great community engagement session out in Bishop. I think that's in my neck of the woods, technically. I like to go. So if there's an opportunity for me to go, I can drive that distance just to demonstrate fidelity to trying to show up in every part of the state geographically as commissioners. And so just keep me posted on that one if that's okay. But Commissioner, yeah.
Of course, Chair Matthews, we love your commitment, and yes, you're definitely invited for the ride.
Thank you.
I
Commissioner
think
Tom.
Chair, being that's in your neck of the wood, you kind of have to be there. Let's just put it that way. I don't want to give away too much of, yeah, I know the team has been outstanding and working so diligently to making sure that engagement it's as effective and productive as possible. So again, without giving too much away, I know there's a lot of work's being done, but from everything that I have seen, it's going to be a great engagement. So highly recommend. Anybody that can make those 3 days, please do.
Thank you, Commissioner Tong. And I will throw it back. I will pass it actually back to you, Chair Matthews.
Thank you so much, Dylan, and thank you, Commissioner Tong. All right, we're going to open this one up for public comment as well. Jess, any public comments?
There are no public comments for this item, Chair Matthews. Back to you.
All right, fantastic. All right, we are near the end. Final agenda item, internal wrap up and next steps. So we'll review any action items. I know she's out there. Someone mentioned her earlier, Toya Davis. I'll invite you to summarize the next steps and follow-up items identified during today's meeting. I know you all have been capturing lots of notes, and so I'll pass it over to you for that final recap.
Thank you, Chair Matthews, and thank you to all to have joined us today for this meeting. I captured a few action items for staff, and if I've missed any, if one of staff can let me know. The first one was from item number 7, evaluating the racial equity framework. Commissioner Maldonado instructed us to look into creating custom toolkits for each North Star agency with illustrative examples for the implementation toolkits for the Department of Finance. Also bringing the presenters from today's meeting together to assist with creating the illustrations based on materials shared, also while considering the legal reasoning as well. The second action item came from number 11. The data committee discussion will be shared during an upcoming commission meeting where we are able to have more commissioners present to be able to contribute to the discussion. The third and final action item came from number 13, our community engagement discussion. Commissioner or Chair Matthews indicated that he would be interested in visiting Bishop as the representation for the commission, and we also have room for one more commissioner to join. And that concludes the action items unless staff has any others that I did not capture.
Thank you so much, Toya. Commissioner Tong, anything else?
I would just say it on the Bishop again. I want to make sure the chair have a chance to ask other commissioners too. But if there's no takers, I'll put myself on the waiting list. How is that?
That sounds good. Thank you so much. Appreciate you. All right. I can't think of any additional action items besides what you listed there. So thank you for that good summary. I guess the last thing is just wanted to reiterate, it will be important for us to move forward with a sense of urgency in terms of getting a special meeting where we can't have a quorum. And so I know you all are already working on that, but I just wanted to underscore the importance of having a meeting where we do have a quorum so that we can continue to move the work forward. And so if you don't already have that one on the list, please add that one to the list.
That is duly noted. Thank you.
You're very welcome. All of the actions will help us continue to move the work forward, and so we do appreciate it. I think we do need to take public comment on this agenda item as well. Jess, do we have any public comments?
There are no public comments on this item. Back to you.
All right, fantastic. Well, that brings us to the end of today's agenda. Thank you to the commissioners, all of the presenters, members of the public, the California Racial Equity Commission team for joining us today. Because we did not have a quorum today, no formal action was taken during this meeting. Items requiring commission action will return at a future properly noticed meeting when quorum is present. Again, I know we're stacking up several action items from the last couple of meetings, and so we will try to get that scheduled quickly. The commission team will follow up on next steps and future meeting information. And with that, this meeting of the California Racial Equity Commission is adjourned at 1:19 p.m. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Chair Matthews.
You're welcome. Take care.